What's going on, guys? We're here. We're live. Welcome to a brand new Poker Live podcast. Happy Mother's Day. My name is Joe Ingram, aka Chicago Joey. Joined today on a podcast, guys. I know a lot of you guys out there may be newer poker fans or fans of the podcast. You might not know past like 2014, and that's okay. That's fine. I understand. But we got a guy today, very old school player guy. He is a long-time high-stakes player back in the day. He's involved with some ups and downs in the poker world. Wrote a poker book, actually. What's the name of the book, Haseeb?
It's called How to Be a Poker Player, The Philosophy of Poker.
How to Be a Poker Player, The Philosophy of Poker. A guy that's been talked about in a bunch of different places over time in the poker world. Recently got a lot of exposure for allegedly negotiating his salary from up to 120K to 250K. And he wrote a blog post about it. Yahoo featured it. And then 2+2, there was a discussion about it. And I was like, you know what? I want to get this guy on a podcast. I'm just interested because he's done a lot of cool writing over the years. And before, when I was younger, I may not have understood what the fuck he was saying. But now as I get older and go back and kind of read some of it, some of the words actually starting to make a little bit of sense. And I didn't even know he really was into, he studied philosophy, into philosophy. Obviously, if you guys watch the podcast regularly, you know, we've been talking a lot of philosophy type of stuff lately. So I'm like, man, let's make this happen. Let's do it. And Haseeb Qureshi, aka DogisHead, aka Internet Pokers, correct?
Yep.
All right, man. Welcome to the pod. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, you were super surprised. So I reached out to you and I was like, hey, Haseeb, you know, like I said, normally I never reach out to random people I just don't know at all. Because I feel weird. I feel like I tell a fucking like, Haseeb, this is Joseph Ingram. I'm calling to see if you'd like to come. You know, I feel just kind of weird, like it's like a sales call sort of thing. So, right. But you see, you were like, I'm not really in poker anymore. And yeah. And I told you this is in poker, so this would be one of the perfect podcasts to be on. So, but tell people a little bit about your time in poker a little bit. I give like if someone was going to ask you, hey, Haseeb, you know, what was poker like, or what was the experience like, or what'd you do in poker? What would be like your 30, 60 second sort of, I guess, introduction about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I started playing poker when I was 16 years old. This is back in what year? 2007, I want to say. Basically got in right after UIGEA. If anyone, probably no one remembers what that is now. But basically, party poker was shut out of the American market, and supposedly this was like the end of the golden age of online poker, as it was called then. I'm sure every generation says like the previous generation was a golden age, but whatever. So I started playing poker around then. I was 16 years old, so I was underage. I started with $50 that I got for free. Actually, I didn't, so because I was underage, like I couldn't actually play online legally. And so what I did was I asked my older brother if he could like lend me some money so I could start playing poker, because I'd like start playing some play money, and I figured I knew what I was doing and I could start making some money. He was like, fuck no, you're an idiot. Like, no, you know, focus on your studies. And I was like, all right, whatever. I got to do this. Like, I really want to learn how to play poker. So I ended up, so this is back in the day when, like, if you just Google image search driver's license, you could just find like unedited photos of people's driver's licenses. And so there was this promotion on Party Poker where if you scanned in your driver's license, they would give you $50 for free to like just like incentivize you to start playing. So I went online, I took this like this driver's license photo of some lady from Maryland who's like in her 70s, and that's how I started my poker career. Because I was 16, like I couldn't deposit, I had no means of getting my money out, and that's like, so basically I came into poker kind of not, you know, I was like 16 years old, I was, you know, in school, and I didn't come from a background where like I knew anything about gambling. You know, none of my friends really played poker. It wasn't like a thing that I'd kind of fallen into. It was something I found more interesting, kind of in the abstract. It's like this game, or this, you know, strategy game that you could get really good at. So I ended up like grinding up, you know, the 5-cent, 10-cent games, slowly working my way up. After a year, I turned that $50 into 100K. The year after that, I think I made 300K, and I was
hold on, back up. Wait a sec. One year later, you're 17. You made 100. You turned up to 100K.
Yeah. I was like the top 3-6 player on PokerStars back then. And I was 17. I was 17 years old. I think I was 17 when I started making videos for Deuces Cracked, and then eventually for Card Runners. Then I was like eventually one of their lead instructors. Mm-hmm. So I started doing that. I started like coaching, and then I think in like 2008, 2009, I started like getting more and more into high stakes. 2008, I think I decided to specialize in heads up. And the story there, Do you know Ben Strati? Or he's like Strati, Straate.
No, I got to tell you, I hate that motherfucker from my PLO times. He was a massive fucking bum hunter, and I just couldn't stand. I couldn't fucking stand him. So, but yeah, I do. Shout out to him. I don't.
So back in the
I don't
day,
hate him anymore.
Yeah. So back in the day on PokerStars, Strati was like a beast. He was a complete killer. He played. This is back when like 10-20 was the highest stakes that they offered on Stars. He was just completely crushing it, and he was like kind of, in a way, he was like part of the same cohort that I sort of grew up in, where he and I like moved through 3-6 together, and then he like pulled way out ahead of me and like started beating all these high stakes games, and like it's like, man, I want to be like Strati. I want to be good like him. And so I remember I was just getting now into like 5-10 and 10-20 six max games, and I was like really good when the game was 6-handed and 5-handed, but I was not so good when the game came down to like 3 or 2-handed, right? And I would get really uncomfortable. I just didn't feel like I was in my element. And so I asked Strati, like, man, whenever games get short, like I get really uncomfortable. What should I do? Like, how should I get better at this kind of poker? And the advice he gave me was, why don't you only play heads up for like a month? Play nothing but heads up, and then by the time you get done, you will be like just a beast of a six max player. Like you'll just be so much better than anybody else that heads up. And I was like, cool, that's a really good idea. I'm going to try that. So I started playing heads up only for a month, and I ended up winning so much money and having so much fun and really enjoying the game that I decided, all right, screw six max, heads up is my jam. And I became essentially like one of the first like heads up pros, where essentially like I was only playing heads up games. Or heads up specialist, whatever you want to call it. And so basically 2008, 2009, I was playing almost exclusively heads up, mostly Noble at Hold'em. By 2009, I was also playing Pot Limit Omaha. And I think, around like 2008, 2009, I reached basically like the highest echelon of the high stakes games, where I was playing like 100, 200, 200, 400 on Full Tilt Poker and PokerStars. I think like a lot of people put me at being like the top 10 and heads up games. And then that was also around the time that like I really stopped. It was kind of around the time that like I stopped enjoying poker, and I kind of started, having this rift kind of growing where like I had dropped out of school. I'd gone to college, originally studying philosophy, and I withdrew from college because I was like, man, this poker thing is really taking off. I'm like teaching, I'm coaching, I'm playing poker. Like this is, obviously, much more lucrative and like a better thing to invest in than education right now. But kind of the way that I got into poker was very haphazard, right? Like I never really planned to become a poker player. It wasn't like part of what I wanted to become an adult and do. It was just this thing that I found really curious and interesting, and I wanted to like solve, So that ended up making me like really, really resentful when I was kind of around the same time that like I was at my pinnacle as a poker player. Like I just really hated the game. Like I didn't like what it was turning me into. I didn't like poker culture. Like I didn't really care that much about making money. It was just more about winning and getting good and like learning how to play this game better than anybody else could play it, So this kind of led me to like repeatedly quitting the game, where like I would, take like months away and then I'd come back, and I'd take months away and come back. Then around, I think it was like I think it was early 2009, I want to say. I might be getting my timeline a little bit fuzzy. But I think it was like early 2009 or 2010, I think I got hacked by, there was like this ring of Swedish hackers who ended up, that was a really fucked up episode, which lasted a couple months, where like I was playing against people and they knew what cards I had, and I kind of could figure out something was going wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Eventually the whole thing got busted open on 2+2, but like no one ever got their money back. And so that really like fucked me off for a while, and I was like, all right, fuck this game. Like I'm not gonna do this for a while. Then I ended up playing Isildur around the time where he like had his really rapid ascent. And for the most part, like I think I ended up losing like 10, 15 buy-ins to him at 50, 100. But like that ended up also making me like, fuck man, this game. And then, so then around that time, like a lot of that kind of precipitated my really stepping away from poker. So I ended up coming back around 2010. And I ended up deciding to get back into the game along with Jungleman and Ashton. Ashton being ASHman, and Jungleman, I guess everybody knows who he is.
I just want to say something about that. So we're gonna have Jungleman on the podcast again tomorrow, guys, 11 a.m. Eastern, because he's in like Romania right now. He's a podcast favorite. They love when he's on the pod. But that'll be tomorrow morning, guys. So you can tune into that. And I hope I'm awake. I honestly, I don't know how I'm gonna be awake. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So you're right. You're with Jungleman.
Yeah.
And man, I really have something to say about this Ashton thing, because I remember there was. Well, I'm gonna get into that later. But
okay, yeah. Let me finish the story, then I'll let you interject with the stuff about Ashton. So, and I'm kind of like giving a very cursory overview.
No, man, this is good. But trust me, I like this, man. Go ahead. I'm enjoying.
Okay, cool. I'm glad. So I decided to like basically I met Jungle Man. He like was somebody, you know, like, because at the time, like, I was a pretty well-known poker instructor and made a lot of videos. Jungle Man had like watched a lot of my videos, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you know, like, I respect you. Think you're a cool guy." I was like, "Cool, you know, I'm trying to get back into poker because I haven't really been playing much, and like I want to try living with other poker players, just because like I'd never done that before. For a very, very long time, I was very isolated from poker. Like, I'd never actually met anybody. I was underage this entire time. You know, I'd never been to Vegas. Like, you know, poker was this very abstract thing that just like sucked up my happiness. You know, that was basically what poker was in my life. And everybody I knew in my real life were non-poker players. So I decided that like maybe a way to get back into the game and like rekindle my passion for it would be to live with other poker players. So the idea was that Ashton, Jungle, and I would live together, and we ended up moving to Orlando of all places, which was a pretty horrible idea. But you know, whatever. It worked at the time. So we went out there. We played poker together. I was trying to like get back into the game, and then around then there was this infamous running bet that happened between Ashton and I, where we ended up putting about 300K 3-1. So basically Ashton was putting up 900K on this crazy bet that kind of like spiraled out of control and was really, really intense.
Okay, so I want to talk about that. I just want to expand that, then we're going to get back to the story. So recently, before, there was this big fucking backlash about it on your end. Like, why would you do this to your friend? Like, what are you doing? But now they just did Brian Rass just did a bet where he was bet 600,000 to 100,000 that he couldn't ride his bike from Vegas to Los Angeles in like a day or two. And it's like praise. Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. But now a very similar type of thing, I think we could say, that happened with you and Ashton. People were so like just angry. Like, why would you put your friend through that? And it's quite interesting seeing other reactions to these very similar type of things that are happening now as compared to back then, just changing out the participants in who was active in the bet. So I found this quite fascinating when I was writing a couple of things down before this.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because if there's one thing that I've learned from my time in poker is that if there's one thing that the community is not, it's consistent. You know, like there's no like internal mastermind that like makes responses coordinated in a way that makes sense. You know, and like I think a lot of the reaction to the bet was like because of the fact that it ended up being so sensational.
Well, you wrote a blog post about it, right? That was a pretty sensational blog that kind of turned it into that being that sort of thing. Yeah,
and like, you know, the reason why I wrote the blog post was that like it was a really affecting experience to me. You know, like it was extremely like it was really fucking intense, and it really like changed my relationship, one with gambling, and also with Ashton. You know, like it was something that really weighed on me heavily in all the subsequent interactions that we had, and also just like in the relationship that I had with gambling in general. But of course, like that's a level of nuance that no one ever wants to hear. They just want to be like, "Oh my God, you're trying to take advantage of your friend and kill him so you can make money." And I don't know, like there's just these very easy fucking simplistic narratives that people can put together that are just like, you know, I don't know. The internet rewards arguing. You know, that's like the number one thing that I've kind of realized is that. And, you know, anytime that I ever met somebody in person, and like I've met like lots of poker players in person, nobody ever was like, "Oh, you're a horrible person for doing this bet." You know, there's always like some level of like empathy and understanding. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're a poker player. This other person is also a poker player. This bet started as being just like an informal bet that wasn't a big deal, and it sort of grew into something else."
Let me talk about the bet real quick, just for someone who doesn't know what the bet we're talking about or didn't hear Haseeb initially. So the bet was made between him and Ashton Griffin. Ashton, it was what was Ashton's online name? ASHman, yeah. So ASHman used to play a lot of high stakes poker too. They made a bet where Ashton had to run. How far did he have to run? It was in 24 hours. He had to run 70 miles.
Don't remember. I think that sounds right.
So he had to run 70 miles, and you gave him 3-1. Was that how it worked?
He gave me 3-1.
Oh shit! What a crazy person. He gave you 3-1, 900K to win your 300K, right?
Correct.
God, what a terrible bet for him.
Yeah, that was the idea, right? And the other thing too. Yeah, the other thing too worth noting is that like this was like a very common thing for Ashton. Like he would do a lot of crazy things like this, and like I'd seen him do a lot of them and like try to discourage him from doing them. And at the time, like he was trying to get other people to take action on this bet. And like the way it started, it's like I guess an innocuous sort of thing. Like the way it started, like I came downstairs, he was like, he was talking with Boosted. You guys, Boosted J?
Justin Smith.
Justin Smith, yeah. He was chatting with him, and he was like, "Hey, I want to do this bet. Like, how much action do you want to take?" And Justin's like, I don't know, like blah 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 blah. He's like kind of being kind of squirrely about it, and then Ashton turns to me and is like, "Hey, what odds would you put on this bet?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd take it at 3-1." And he's like, "Cool, let's book it." And I was like, "All right, fine, I'll book this bet at 3-1. Like, if you're intent on doing it, fine." And then other people were like, "Cool, I'll get in on this bet too." And there it just started. Like, it started pretty small. It was like, I don't remember, it was like 10K or something to start with, and then it just ended up growing bigger and bigger and bigger and getting more insane. And people, people continually say, I mean, not continually, like, I mean, this was fucking years ago, but the one thing that I remember people continually saying was that, like, oh, you had these chances to buy out. Why didn't you buy out? Like, the fact that you didn't buy out clearly means that you were doing something wrong.
Come on.
Yeah, but the thing that's really clear to me, like, two things. One is that, like, if you take the bet in the first place, either the bet initially is wrong, and like you shouldn't take the bet at all, which I think is plausible. Like, I think you can make a principled argument that I shouldn't have taken the bet. Absolutely. But the argument that, like, oh, you should have bought out halfway through, that's nonsensical. Like, then I shouldn't have taken the bet in the first place. And if you take the bet in the first place, like, the last portion of the bet is the portion in which he's most likely to fail, right? Like, you don't take the bet thinking like he's going to fail on mile 10. That would be absurd. Like, it's just such a fundamental misunderstanding of what you're betting on, So anyway, I don't know. I just think, like, anyway, it doesn't matter. That's the bet. It was a big sensational thing. Ended up being really weird. Ultimately, it didn't ended up being kind of a footnote to the whole GIRAH thing, but nevertheless, it kind of, I guess, maybe primed the pump for people to get worked up. So I don't know. Sorry, I can't hear you anymore. Sound just cut out. Okay.
Unplugged it. All right, we're back.
Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah, I think that's the GIRAH thing. I don't really know much about exactly what that all entail. I know it was with you, Jungle, and an alleged Portuguese prodigy, but I know that's what most people sort of, when they think about you in poker, they associate with that.
Right. So that's all. Tell the story. Yeah.
So yeah, totally. So that came after the ASHman thing.
It did. Yeah. Okay. So well, they're kind of like somewhat parallel timelines, but like the actual events in the scandal happened a good while later. So let me present the story this way. So after the running bet, so Ashton ended up winning the bet, and I decided to leave just because, like, I just felt really shitty, and I was like, I can't stay here. Like, I feel guilty. I feel like this is, very clearly my fault, and I just kind of needed to, like, reflect on my relationship with poker and with gambling, because, like, I'd come there to rekindle my relationship with poker, and that had clearly very much not happened. Like, I still hated poker. I still didn't want to do it, and then this crazy bet ends up rolling out, and, like, I feel even worse, and I feel even less connected to poker as, like, what is important to me. So I ended up leaving, going back to Austin. Jungle ends up coming along, and around then Black Friday hits. So Black Friday, I assume everybody knows about Black Friday.
So yeah, for the, if someone doesn't know, there could be people watching from the Haseeb world now, the tech world sort of thing, doesn't understand Black Friday. The government changed the laws to continue to play online poker legally. Wait, let me change that. To continue to play online poker on the major poker sites and not the terrible poker sites that are sort of secondhand or potentially by-skirt the laws, aka break terms of service, you had to move out of the country. So you couldn't play poker in the USA anymore on PokerStars, Full Tilt, etc., right. The big poker sites.
Exactly. So basically, like, there was a massive shutting down of what most of the poker economy was in the United States. So if you wanted to play online poker, you had to, like, for the most part, leave the States. So that was an ordeal, and, like, Jungle and I were dealing with that for a while. And so then probably enter GIRAH. So GIRAH, I first met him he like reached out to me again. Like he was somebody who'd like watched my videos and like he wanted to get coaching from me. And this man, when did this actually happen? Like maybe like mid 2010, like a long time before any of these events actually precipitated. So he was like this guy who was like a mid-stakes player on Euro sites, and he was super young. He was like 17. So he was like underage, and he seemed to be reasonably successful. So I like gave him some advice and just chatted with him about stuff. And then a little bit while later, a post ended up coming on 2+2 that was like looking for some ridiculous thing. It was like the Portuguese prodigy, somebody's winning a bunch of money on poker sites, and there were some rumors that he's an 18-year-old kid from Portugal. Does anyone know who he is? And then Jose GIRAH, he messages me and he's like, hey, this is a thread about me. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, you should post in there and like start, like building your street cred if you want to build a career as a professional, and like, ultimately end up making it into the bigger leagues, right? Which tends to be, getting on TV, getting a following, things like that, where poker becomes very, very much more lucrative without having to actually be that good, right? So I'm like, yeah, you should absolutely like take advantage of that moment, introduce yourself, and like build your brand. And so then he asked me if I'll help him, and I'm like, well, I don't really do that sort of thing. Like I'm very busy like coaching and playing poker and stuff like that, but I'll sort of informally give you advice if you want it. So I, told him like, all right, write a post, like do this thing, blah, 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 get yourself out there. So he started doing it. And the more that I was helping him, he was like, hey, can I just like pay you money to do this? And I was like, all right, you just pay me, something, and I'll help you out, because I liked him. I wanted to see him do well. And he seemed, in my mind, he seemed like very genuine. And very unlike most other poker players. Most poker players I don't really like. They tend to be very materialistic and like very, I don't know. There's like this there's very machismo culture that surrounds poker, and I never really bought into that. And GIRAH just seemed like a really simple kid who like wanted to get good at this game, and like he very much reminded me of myself, I guess. So I was like, cool, yeah, you know what? I want to help you. I don't want to see you like get chewed up and spit out by poker. And like, I don't want to see you, like I'd seen so many young players who became really successful who just got destroyed by poker, and I was like, I don't want to see that happen to you. As soon as someone becomes famous and someone like gets a lot of traction, the first thing that comes out is like leeches and people trying to take advantage of you, people trying to make you take bad bets. Like, I mean, it's the oldest thing in the world, and it happened to me, happened to Jungle, it happened to ASHman. It happens to almost everybody who gets big in the poker world, is that you just get surrounded by usually the worst kinds of people, and so I was actively trying to protect him from that. And, he was like trying to hire poker agents and like other stupid shit that just didn't make any sense. Yeah, there's like an ecosystem of people like this who just offered no real value. But anyway, whatever. So I started helping him out and helping him like build up his brand. Eventually there are like all these stories that he told us about, like how he ended up like his uncle defrauded him out of a lot of money, which was plausible because he was 17 and like, he was playing in his mother's name and all this other stuff. So he eventually decided like he was going through a downswing and he wanted staking. So this is like a really common thing in the poker world. Like I've gotten staked before. Most professional poker players I know, even ones who are really, really big, have gotten staked at some point. Not necessarily because like they are broke or they don't have any money, but because it just like alleviates the psychological pressure of having to perform, right? It's like, all right, I'm losing money. I just want to not lose money anymore and just be able to play poker without worrying about losing my own money, and there's something like, obviously, I mean, I don't think it's hard to understand. Something that's very psychologically appealing about playing with someone else's money. And so I was like, all right, cool. You're a good player. Jungle and I would be happy to stake you. And so we end up staking Jose. So the way in which we staked Jose, so we end up chip dumping him money on this site that he ended up getting sponsored on, which is called Lock Poker. And so it turned out around the same time that we were chip dumping him this money, and we chip dumped him the money because Lock Poker didn't have transfers. And I don't know what transfers are like now. I mean, it's like 4 or 5 years since I was playing poker, but back then on a lot of like top poker sites, like the transfer policies are really, really restrictive.
Wait, why wasn't he playing on PokerStars at that time?
Why wasn't he playing on PokerStars? Let me see if I can remember why. I think like, I mean, I know that Lock Poker was like a lot easier than Stars, and he like knew the regs there. There were more fish. It was just software games, and like he was also, I can't remember what, like, I mean, he was sponsored there, right? He was like one of their top pros, so he
This
got
was
some kind of
Black
kick.
Friday, right? So this was 2010, 2011.
This was pre and post Black Friday because Lock
Okay.
Poker wasn't shut down in Black Friday.
Right, right.
Yeah. So anyway, so you end up chip dumping this money. It turns out at the same time this chip dump happened, there was some kind of competition going on Lock Poker, where Lock Poker was being tracked. And they were being tracked because there was this competition. Normally, it wasn't like an untracked site. So again, I don't know if this is still something that holds true, but back then there was like poker table ratings, which basically was like scraping all of the major poker sites and like spitting out the results of players who are winning or losing money. Back then, the only sites that were basically being scraped were like Party Poker, PokerStars, and Full Tilt Poker. So basically, any other site was effectively anonymous, except for the players who are actually literally playing at the table or observing that table. So we assumed that Lock Poker obviously wasn't being tracked. So it's like, all right, cool, we can ship them this money. It's not something we need to like be sheepish about or like we have to worry about. Later on, people would ask like, why didn't we find some other way to give him the money? Well, he was 17 at the time, and so all of his bank accounts were in his mother's name. And so, especially given like the stories he told us in the past of like his extended family like defrauding him, and also the fact that we didn't know his mother, and it's just like some Portuguese lady, we were like, okay, we trust you, Jose. I don't know your mother. I don't know your family. I'm not going to fuck with that. Like, I'm going to get this money to you, and if you lose this money, you're accountable to us. And it's like within the poker code. You know what I mean? And so we were like, yeah, this seems to be the approach that makes the most sense. So what ended up happening was that there was a competition going on then called the Bluff Challenge, and the Bluff Challenge was like this thing on Bluff Magazine, I guess, was running this thing, and the idea was the person who won the most money that month on Lock Poker would get on the cover of Bluff Magazine and get a free seat to the WSOP, which is worth 10K. So partially, part of his winnings were like a significant portion of his winnings were from this chip dump, and Jose ended up topping out that list. And so if he won, he actually wouldn't be able to get the WSOP seat because he's underage. So he wouldn't get that. He would just get on the cover of Bluff Magazine, which I don't know what you think that's worth, but whatever. He ended up getting disqualified because when Lock Poker did an investigation, they found out that someone else had logged into his account at that time from some other IP. The person who logged into his account ended up being Jungle Man, who like played some session of PLO after Black Friday. That was essentially what happened. So it was like, I don't know, like a few hundred hands that Jungle Man had played. So these are all pivotal pieces. I seems like kind of granular, but they come back into play in the GIRAH scandals. That's kind of why I'm laying the foundation out now. So he ended up getting disqualified, and the next person in line ended up winning the thing, and they got the seat, and they ended up getting on the cover of Bluff Magazine. So we were like, okay, cool. That we were really worried about like this chip dump getting exposed, making it seem like we cheated, and then like losing this 100K, and just like all the fucked up shit that would have happened. Like, cool. It seems like this thing just kind of resolved itself, and fine. We don't really give a shit about Jose getting on the cover of a magazine. So then, after Black Friday, we decided that we are going to go move to Portugal because Portugal is like cheap. It's like cool city. Lisbon seems like a really awesome place. And we're like, Jose is the only person we really know well who lives in Portugal or who lives in Europe, right? And so we're like, cool, we'll go live with him. It'll be Jungle, myself, and Jose, and we'll just live together and grind together, and we'll like make it a thing, So a day before I fly out to Gibraltar, I get a message from somebody that Jose has cheated someone. And so I'm like, okay, this sounds like bullshit. This sounds like some weird thing. I mean, I don't know. Things like this just come up. People accuse each other of weird shit all the time. And so then I started investigating this thing. Like, Jose is kind of freaking out. Some person is like, hey, like Jose is part of our like Skype group. He's like a buddy with all of us. And we really think that he is cheating. But, I don't think that Jose could do it. Like, it's really implausible. Like, he's such a good guy. Like, there must be some misunderstanding. We'll like look more into it. And so I started asking like, hey, can you show me the evidence? Like, what is the case that you guys are making for Jose cheating? And because like, I guess they see me as being like a respected person in the poker community, they sort of see me as like an arbiter in some way to like try to resolve this. So they give me all this evidence, and it turns out to be really clear that Jose was up to something really shady, right? And it's not obvious that he cheated, but it's obvious like something fucked up was going on. And so I'm like, okay, cool. If you guys see anything else, let me know. We hang up with them. I talk to Jose. I'm like, hey, Jose, it looks like something fucked up was going on. What did you do? Like, what happened? Explain this to me. I push him and push him. Eventually, he confesses that he has cheated people. What he was essentially doing was he had a friend, or no, he had another account. He would convince people to play this other account, and he would team viewer them. So he would team viewer with them and basically sweat them as they were playing and tell them that, like, no, this fish is crazy. Like, he does all this weird stuff. I know what he's doing. Like, I've played him a lot of times. Like, but if, I can help you play against him. Right.
Wow.
And this guy would just, make these incredible calls and plays and whatever. And Jose, like, there were just a lot of really obvious things. Like, they were always online at the same time. Like, there's, Jose was doing very little to cover his tracks. It was like a very unsophisticated scam, So then he freaks out. He he goes incommunicado after he confesses to this thing. I am like, all right, fuck, this is like really scary and terrifying. But okay, like, I got to tell everybody that this is what happened. I go back to the group of people. I tell them this is what happened. Jose has cheated everybody, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, all right, well, that's fucking crazy. What do we do now? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to go on a plane to Gibraltar and we'll try to figure it out as we go. So I go and fly out to Gibraltar. The whole, finally we get back in touch with Jose. We tell Jose, hey, you got to refund these people the money you stole from them, as well as pay them reparations for, like, the fact that you cheated them. Like, if you want any chance at all of surviving the poker community, like, you have to do at least that. And so he's like, okay, fine. So he's like, pledges that he's going to pay people back. And then Jungle and I double down on that because we've both not only staked Jose, but we've also vouched for him publicly, right? Now, the public doesn't know that we've staked Jose, but they do know that we've vouched for him, right? So we are basically like, yeah, we're gonna back this money. If Jose doesn't pay it, we will. Like, we will make sure that at least you will get back the money that Jose defrauded you out of because we vouched for him, right? So basically, so the thing that I do then is I try to convince them not to immediately make this story go public and like post about it on 2+2, because I know if they just post it on 2+2, then Jose is just going to get destroyed and he'll never have a career in poker, and probably there'll be like a lot of negative stuff around anybody who's ever backed Jose or like vouched for him, including myself, Jungle, and other people who like kind of were part of that, part of propping him up. And so I make the very, very unfortunate mistake of like trying to ask people to not post about this publicly. And so we have like this ongoing discussion where they're like, yeah, we don't really want to hurt him, but like we have to talk about it. And I'm like, yes, I understand that, but like I think it was a mistake, and I think like he's, he can learn from this, and if you post about this, like he'll never be able to play poker again. And so I'm acting very much defensively and like wanting to protect him and also protect myself and like other people I know, which ultimately ended up coming out later on in the story and ended up making me look like I was somehow complicit in the cheating. So what ends up happening afterwards is the story breaks on 2+2, and like a lot of it is like asking them like, hey, can you at least like allow Jose to say something, like basically tell, basically like apologize for having done this, just so that people can like see that he has at least owned up to it, and this is not just like something that happened without, just like externally to that. So they're like, cool, yeah, that's fine, we like Jose, but like we have to put all this stuff out there. So that happens. The thread goes up. Things go crazy. Jungle and I do a horrible job at like actually responding because like we're both like flying.
Wait a second. Were you one of those guys, Haseeb, who talked about you had no internet, you were in a remote location, you couldn't get on the computer?
No. We like posted stuff, but like we were both like the thing is like what was going on at the time. So Jungle was like both Jungle and Jose. Yeah, Jose just gotten sponsored by Poker Strategy. Which was like a huge thing.
Big site, yeah.
Yeah, big site. And Jungle was also sponsored by them. And so we were like trying to talk with like Lock Poker and Poker Strategy and trying to like basically tell them what was going on and like give them the heads up on that stuff was happening and that like they should be prepared for it, and like kind of sort of doing our due diligence. At the same time, 2+2 is exploding. And Jungle and I are like not paying attention to it, because we're just like, yeah, this thing is going to explode. People are going to get really mad. Cool, that's fine. Which ended up being a huge mistake, because then everything just spiraled out of control without us saying anything, right? Like the very first thing we should have done, which again, like, I don't know, like a lot of it was really like, what do they call it? In PR, there's a term for this. it's like fucking, I don't know, like crisis management, I think is what it's called, right? Where like, how do you respond to like crazy shit? You know, there's like a playbook that you should have on like when shit goes down, what do you do, right? And turns out one of the very first things you should do is like talk to the community, you know, like get your voice out there and get it heard about like what's going on, how you feel about it, and like why everything happened the way it happened, right? But we didn't do that. Like I was very much like, this is going to take a long time to explain. Like I'll, you know, when I finally settle down, I'm going to write a blog post and everything will, you know, I'll be able to tell my side of the story and like give more context. But I did not do that quickly. And so the story just like exploded. People who were in the Skype chat, when we ended up like talking about like, you know, please don't post this publicly, they started, and like we, you know, with the pretext like this is, you know, this is a private conversation, they like started getting really pressured because people started blaming them, because people started saying like, oh, you guys were complicit in this. Like, how do we know that like you guys weren't playing a part of the scam? And so basically everybody, there's weird conspiracy theories started just shooting off like crazy. This was like very big thing that happened, I guess, in the scandal. And so those guys started getting freaked out and they started like posting the logs of this conversation that we had. And the way the logs started getting printed out, it started to look like I was doing everything I could to hide everything, right? And so when that became clear, they'd be like, oh, Haseeb was complicit in the scam, right? Like Haseeb was like, this was part of some masterminding thing. Clearly, Jose was a made-up character and he never really existed. There was nobody who was good at poker. Like this was like a sham character that was invented by Haseeb and Jungle Man to try to win more sponsorship money. Or there were all these like really, really crazy theories that started getting propagated. So anyway, this thing starts tumbling out of control, and essentially, like I do a horrible job at communicating with anybody in the poker community, and I also don't. I don't immediately tell the whole story. Like I don't fess up to everything that happened. So I don't tell them, for example, that I was staking Jose. That ends up coming out through other means. I don't tell them that like I was helping him build his brand and like, you know, helping him get his name out there and like help manage his online presence. I didn't tell people that. What else? Like the stuff that happened during the bluff challenge. Didn't tell anybody about all that stuff. And basically, what ended up happening was like being terrified and wanting to protect both myself, protect Jungle, protect Jose. I tried to hold on to as much of it as possible. And I realized that things were going crazy. I was like, all right, everything was me. And so I tried to take on as much responsibility as possible, thinking that, all right, you know, my reputation is going to be destroyed either way, but hopefully at least I can help Jungle, right? Because like nobody's pointing fingers at Jungle. And, you know, if they do, like more damage is going to happen than if it's just on me. So I basically tried to take on as much responsibility as I could. I said that I was the one who played on Jose's account. I basically tried to like remove Jungle from the story as much as possible. That ended up also like it was just very, very ridiculous. That's part of the reason why it was such a sensational scandal, was because everything that happened ended up unraveling. So that ended up unraveling too, and then finally the final story ended up getting pieced together, which was essentially everything that I just described. But by then, people were like, okay, you've lied so many times that fuck you, like, we're done with you. So that's essentially, that's like as, I think, unbiased of a recollection I can give of like the literal events of the scandal, right? And that's like not really interjecting much of my own perspective of like how I felt about it or like whatever. But yeah, like, so throughout it, like, I was a fucking idiot. I made a lot of really, really bad judgments about prioritizing helping my friends and helping myself to not get in trouble over like being really, really brutally honest with the community and like kind of walking up to the guillotine, you know, which, and it's something that like I thought about for a really, really long time. Like I spent years really, really replaying every part of this sequence in my mind. So after this this scandal happened, like that was basically the end of it. And I decided to quit poker because like, I mean, already like, so, you know, like my passion for poker had come to just, you know, a dribble, right? Like it was just, this was the last sort of desiccation where it was just gone. You know, there was no nostalgia anymore for poker. And it became really clear to me that I didn't like who I was, and that my identity as a poker player was constricting that even further. You know, like there was no way to get out of it now. And so I was like, I need to get away from this game, and I need to like invent a self that I actually didn't have that. And it was something that like I was bemoaning for a long time that I didn't feel like I was building that as a poker player. But I was like, okay, now it's really clear to me, even though if I continue to play poker, like I will make more money than I can do doing anything else. You know, that's obvious. And most of the poker players who I known who, for the very much the same reasons, had quit poker, had walked away from the game, they would come back because poker is just, I don't know, it's like an easy mistress, right? It's like, it's just easier to make money at than anything else in your life. It's just comfortable. You know, you're good at it. You know, like it'll just take care of you if you're good at poker. And I didn't want to be that because I knew that if I did, like, I just would not be able to grow as a person. And so I decided that I was going to quit poker for good. And I also decided, I ended up making a bet with somebody where I told him what I would do is if I ever came back as a professional poker player again, it was like some random poster on 2+2. I would pay him $50,000 as sort of a way of like tying my own hand against ever coming back to the game. So then after that, after the GIRAH scandal, I left poker and started traveling. And I basically like wandered from country to country by myself for about 3 months. And it was like a really, really, it was like a very somber and really heavy time in my life where I just, you know, abandoned this identity as a professional poker player, which is like, I was 21, right? I started playing poker when I was 16. And like, it was who I was, right? It was also like what made me special as a human being, right? I didn't have a degree, didn't have any other claim to notoriety in any way as a human being. The only thing that I had done that had made me special or important was that I'd gotten really, really good at this game and I contributed to this community by like teaching, by giving back, by helping out people in the community. And now all of that was gone. You know, there was none of that anymore. And now I was just a 20-something with money and nothing else. And that was really, really hard to understand, like, okay, what the fuck do I do now? Who even am I now that I'm not a poker player, right? Like, how do I make sense of my identity? And so, yeah, I remember, like, you know, as I was traveling, I ended up like, you know, I worked on like a farm for a couple weeks. I took like a 10-day vow of silence and was meditating when I was in, I think it was in the UK. And I spent most of the time alone and like replaying a lot of these events in my mind and thinking about not just like what I could have done differently, because like, of course, I'm going to play that out of my head hundreds of times. Like, what I could have said differently, what I could have done differently, how I could have turned back time and like not done this or not done that, right? And all the different ways that things might be different. And maybe I'd still be playing poker and people would still respect me and I'd still have, you know, these things that I cherish so much that now are just completely gone. But also thinking like what kind of person poker has made me, you know, and the way that it's changed the way that I see the world and the way that I see myself and the way that I just think about things that I never talked about as a poker player, but like things like virtue or charity or like helping the world, you know, that as a poker player, like it's just part of the ontology of a poker player that you ignore these things. You just outright reject them because they're just orthogonal to poker, right? Like you can't think about them, like they're just separate from your life as a poker player, you know? Like you can think about virtue and being a good person, but they don't play a role in poker, you know? Like poker is about optimizing your ROI or optimizing your win rate, right? And like, yes, you have to play within the bounds of poker culture and within the bounds of like poker norms, but it's a purely utilitarian thing, right? It's like when you step away from the poker table, then you can be a human being again and go around thinking about how do I actually live a good life, you know? But within poker, that, you know, it's like all those questions are answered by this, you know, overarching ethos of poker, which is like make money, optimize, you know, be a gambler, right? Make risk neutral decisions. And yeah, it's like realizing that I had this vacuum underneath that I hadn't really filled, and like trying to figure out what kind of life and what kind of person did I actually want to be. And also like, was I a bad person? You know, like was something wrong with me that I'd done this thing? And a lot of people in poker really, really thought so, of course. And like, they told me that. And if there's one thing it's like really, I don't know, like I feel like it's something that everybody should go through because it really just changes so much of how you see yourself as a human being. to be reviled by people. Because I think most people never have that experience, right? Where like there's like a group of people.
Not, no. I don't think so. Yeah.
But there's like a group of people who just think that you are unredeemable, that you're just human waste, and to nevertheless have to find a way to, it's easy if they're like people part of your out group, right? They're not people you identify with. It's like, okay, I'm fine knowing that they're people who, I don't know, are ISIS fighters who like think that all Americans are scum and I'm one of them. Cool. Like I can laugh at that, right? But like knowing that people who are like part of your community think that about you, right? Like it just warps something that's really integral to your like internal consistency in believing that if you do good things, you're a good person.
My friend Donnie Stern, aka Ansky, in the chat right now, one of the favorites of the podcast, says, "Seems like you are blaming poker for your own moral and ethical decisions."
I don't think I'm blaming poker for that. I don't think that's right. I think poker in a large part was my, it was like my adolescence. It's like what I grew up on.
Right.
Like I dropped out of school when I was 18. And like I grew up in the poker community. Now that's not to say that like poker was my moral compass or poker was like how I made decisions or how I became who I am. So that's not at all what I'm saying. Like obviously I had the agency to make decisions, and there are people who are poker players who make very, very upstanding decisions and didn't make any of the mistakes that I did. But what I am saying is that I think poker does have a real effect on the way that you see the world. And I think it's very, very hard to ignore that if you see poker from outside of it. Like I think most people who observe poker and poker players, especially like I think a lot of that has become more acute since the poker economy has really contracted and dried up, where, this is one thing that like I constantly hear a lot of my friends who are still poker players talking about, that when times were good and like plentiful, right, there were a lot of norms within poker culture that were very, very easy to enforce that have just become harder and harder, right? Like there's less and less trust now that poker is just a drier landscape. And I think that exposes something that's fundamental about poker, that it's fundamentally amoral, and we all know that. Like everybody understands that. No, that doesn't come as a surprise.
Do you think poker is
amoral, not immoral? Immoral being like it's wrong or evil. Amoral meaning that it's not concerned with morality, right? It's sort of it doesn't weigh in any way on morality. So like as a poker player, you can do things that are wrong and you do things that are morally right. It doesn't matter, right? It's not a relevant consideration at a poker table. A poker table is a place where like morality goes out the window because we're at a poker table. It's okay for me to take your money. It's okay for me to do, like I can't break the rules of poker and I can't break the norms of poker culture, right? But that's different from morality. Morality is the question of like, am I doing things that are right or wrong, right? But at a poker table, that's not the question that you're supposed to ask. You're supposed to ask, is this within the rules of poker? And the other question that you might ask is this within the norms of poker culture, right? But there's nothing at all wrong with taking money from somebody who is drunk, or taking money from somebody who can't afford it, right? Who taking their money will have a devastating effect on their life, right? Like if you did think about those things, poker would be like almost unplayable. Like how could you even play a game of poker if you were constantly worrying about those things, right?
That's true.
So what I'm saying is not to say like, and I think I can understand how you could see it that way. What I'm saying is not to say that like, oh, I made these mistakes because poker, right? Poker made me a bad person. I don't think that's true. I think that's clearly not true. But what I am saying is that poker pushes you away from thinking actively and deeply about these things.
But don't you think? But I mean, you're still thinking about these things. You can't. It's not just like because you play poker, all of a sudden, when you're doing other things in your life, with your friends or family, or I mean, you don't just really turn it off in all these other areas just because something might be acceptable in terms of what trying to take a drunk person's money at a poker table, and you're figuring out how can I best exploit that person and take money from that person. You don't necessarily go into other parts of your world and be like, well, let me figure out how I can exploit this for the most. I mean, maybe some people do, and that may be what you're saying.
I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You don't necessarily have to, right? There's no reason why you can't completely compartmentalize morality to only apply outside the poker table and be completely amoral at a poker table. There's no reason why you can't. I would just contest that human beings don't work that way,
Hmm.
And I say the vast majority of human beings don't compartmentalize that cleanly. As even, I think people who claim they do probably do less so than they claim they do.
I
Now,
actually,
again,
I'd agree with that though, and I think that's a good point. I would agree with that.
yeah.
From
So
people that I
again,
know specifically.
yeah. So this is okay. I feel like I'm getting in the weeds a little bit here because this is not really the point that I want to make that strongly. I think it's an interesting point and something worth talking about. But I don't think this is really like, I don't think it has a lot to do with my story of like that because poker is an amoral thing. That's why I made these bad decisions. What I want to say more is that it's more about like the way in which one lives one's life, right? Is that poker put me in a place where I wasn't thinking actively about uh, the kind of person I wanted to be. And as a poker player, and this is like about me, as a poker player, what I was thinking about was the kind of poker player that I was. And that was the thing that I focused almost all of my like vital energy towards, was becoming the best poker player that I could be. And that very much changed after I quit poker. In part because like I wasn't a poker player anymore, right? And so there's just, like I said, there's this vacuum now. I can't worry about that anymore. Like it's not just about being the smartest, the fastest, the most risk averse, or not risk averse, risk neutral. It is now about, okay, what kind of a human being do you want to be? You know, what kind of a moral person do you want to be? What kind of a what kind of impact do you want to have on the people around you and the people in your life? And yeah, for a long time after poker, like I was very convinced that I was a bad person and that there was something really deeply wrong with me. And you know, like a lot of the stuff that I read online, and because you know, I mentioned earlier when we were chatting before the stream went live that I finally got into a place where like I can just ignore 2+2, which is it sounds trivial, it sounds like trite, but that was actually extremely challenging for me because it's almost like ignoring like your hometown, you know, or like what people back in like the bar that you grew up in think about you, you know,
Yeah.
because like I grew up there. That is where I gained my identity as an adult, is through poker. And finally getting to a place where I'm like, okay, I am not the person who they claim that I am, you know, like in a lot of ways, like you are, like, you know, as a human being, I think this is like whatever, like existential philosophy, but as a human being, we have like a number of different identities, right? We have like our self-identity that we project on ourselves, but we also have the identity that our friends and the people in our community project on us, and that's also a kind of identity, right? And as a human being, because we are such social animals, right, you can't completely to, you know, there's always some bleeding over that barrier, where the way that other people see you almost by necessity bleeds into the way that you see yourself, because we're just not very good at completely compartmentalizing. You know, that's one thing that human beings suck at, and that they think they're good at, but they're not. And so, yeah, for a long time after I quit poker, I started focusing more on trying to live a very simple life, trying not to spend money, and try to like become a better person and become a better human being, which is a hard thing to think about. I don't think it's something that people very actively try to do. Like I think people think like I want to do good things and I want to like, you know, help, but they don't think very much about how do I become a more virtuous person. It's a very strange and almost like alienating question to have to ask yourself. And so I started spending a lot of time like volunteering, and I went back to school. I you know, was doing a lot of reading and meditating and trying to cut things away from my life as much as possible, and keep my life as simple and minimal as I could. And eventually, one of the things that I decided, one is that I wanted to keep providing value. And I realized that one of the only ways that I really could provide value was through my expertise as a poker player, because I was good at nothing else. You know, I had half of a philosophy degree. I had done basically nothing else with my life other than poker. There's really actually not many ways that I can help people other than people who play poker. For people who play poker, I can provide tremendous value to them. But a lot of times, like the way in which you provide that value is not very obvious or very direct, right? So I decided that I would start coaching, but not strategy coaching, because for one thing, I don't believe that people who aren't playing poker actively should be doing strategy coaching, but also because like I want to separate myself away from poker as much as possible. And so I started doing mental coaching, where basically I worked with poker players on a lot of the mental side of poker, and I ended up working on a book that I ended up publishing about a couple of years later after I quit poker.
2014, I think it was.
Yeah, beginning of 2014, I think. I could be wrong. I could be messing up the timeline. Yeah, so the book, it was a book that I'd actually wanted to write for a very, very long time. Because back when I was a poker player, I always like thought a lot about philosophy as it related to poker.
Haseeb, I can tell this about you. I can tell you think a lot about things, my friend. I mean, I can tell that. I mean, some people say that in some sort of bad way. They say, "Oh, you overthink things." I can tell you think about a lot of things. I mean, I can't imagine just in terms of everything, man. You're probably running a million scenarios through your head when it comes almost everything.
Right. I think that's definitely true. I'm definitely guilty as charged. But the thing that I found interesting about poker, particularly like when I was playing it, when I was teaching it too. So like when I was a poker coach, and when I was like doing a lot of the stuff with card runners and Deuces Cracked, one of the things that I got a lot was that people really loved the way that I talked about and taught poker. And I taught poker in a very novel way that a lot of people weren't used to, like the concepts being broken down in the ways that I break them down. And that struck me as really odd, that people didn't try to like reason from first principles about poker. People use like a lot of heuristics and a lot of like sort of lazy abstractions that weren't very well thought out or like well analyzed. And I was like, that's crazy to me. Like, I mean, I don't know, like part of it is just like the instinct to be really analytical and like break things down to their smallest components. But I always had this idea in my mind that like I wanted to write a book about poker where like I explained how poker worked to a way that anybody who's just analytical could understand it, because like I didn't buy all the bullshit that people said about poker being like this like thing you just have to feel, and you have to like have this crazy intuition, and you just have to like, I don't know. I think people have this like very exclusive idea that poker is this like airy thing that's elusive and hard to capture. And I didn't agree with that. I was like, no, you can explain everything in poker. People just don't try enough, and don't try to find the right level of abstraction to explain things. And so I decided, all right, cool. Before I finish with poker for good, I want to write this book. And I want this book to like also contain kind of all the advice that I could give to somebody who wanted to become a poker player and be successful as a poker player. And so that was kind of the impetus for writing this book. So the title of the book is How to Be a Poker Player, The Philosophy of Poker. And the reason why I named it that is because one of the things I talk about in the book is that, people teach you how to play poker, but no one teaches you how to be a poker player. And in my opinion, it's much harder to be a poker player than it is to play poker. Because like playing poker is just like, you can read books, you can like watch strategy videos. Like it's very, very laid out how to play poker well, but how to actually structure your life and live well as a poker player and like flourish as a poker player is really hard, and most people don't. Most poker players are actually miserable. And like that is really obvious to anybody who like is in poker and knows a lot of professional poker players, and it's amazing to people who are not professionals and who like see poker from the outside. They think that poker players are like just on a never-ending party, and that like they're wildly happy beyond their dreams, and like it's just such an amusing dichotomy that poker players are among the unhappiest people I've met, and they're perceived from the outside as being like just living a constant orgy. So
I mean, some of us live a constant orgy, Haseeb. I can't say all of us don't. Shout to Justin Bonomo, shout to me. I mean, whatever. But I understand.
Fair enough.
A lot of people out there, you're right. They are. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot, but maybe the certain people I know that still play poker now that I've known for years that are still involved in poker. They're generally pretty happy people, but it seemed like back in the day, it sort of breeded. And I think this is because also, and you can tell me what you think about this. I think because to get really good at poker right now, you had to put in so much work to get to that point. And back in the day, you didn't necessarily have to really put in that much work. There wasn't this emphasis on working hard, on really studying, on really, really, really doing all this work to get as good as you can. It sort of just came to a lot of people. Like, I mean, you moved up stakes, made 100K your first year playing. Like, you don't really see things like that happening now. So it's like, it came so easy where you don't necessarily feel like I really put in the work. I might, maybe even deserve, potentially some people might feel they don't really deserve this. And maybe that makes them feel some type of way. Whereas now a lot of people, they've been working hard for years at it, and they might have a little different outlook on it.
Right. I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that like poker is, I mean, this shouldn't be surprising. Poker is like one of the most stressful and uncertain jobs you could possibly do, you know? And human beings don't react well to stress. Like if there's one thing that we know about human physiology, it's that stress is among the worst things for both your health and for your well-being psychologically. So to me, it's like utterly unsurprising that poker players are by and large unhappy. And also that like a lot of them have gambling addictions. So like, how is that, this shouldn't be surprising that this cohort of people are not tremendously happy. And also, of course, the fact that like, we also know at a large scale that, the more money you have, there are sort of, logarithmic returns on the amount of happiness that you gain for incrementally more money. So like people who have a lot of money and are really successful at poker, you shouldn't be that inclined to think that they're that much happier than people who are like doing okay.
That makes sense. I guess it's a good point. People from the outside do sort of look at poker players, I guess the more celebrity poker players, and think that, I mean, I don't know, man. I guess I just know people that I don't necessarily, I think that, yeah, and the people I don't know, I guess I don't know, they seem, a lot of those guys that I'm friends with, they're doing what they want to do. They're pretty happy. They travel, they have a good time. And
yeah, I believe you. And I know people like that as well. Like, I'm not saying that this is like the, what everybody in poker is like. Absolutely. There are people for whom this is like the thing they want to do, and they're very happy doing it.
Do you think, but do you, it's like, I mean, what kind of like how many people are you basing this off of? Are you basing this off of more of your own personal experience with it? And maybe you think that's sort of really affecting the way that you view it, which would make sense too? Or do you think that you've talked to that many poker players and that's what you've seen, sort of thing?
I mean, I've been in the poker community for a long time, enough to like have just met a lot of players firsthand, and also working as a mental coach, I think I saw a lot of that as well. But there's also the fact that like, I mean, the thing is, okay, so there's this really interesting, study, actually. I think this might be a good parallel, that was done a while ago, of people on Facebook. And what they were actually trying to check, what they were trying to test is, actually two studies I want to name here that I think have an interesting parallel to what we're talking about right now. One was that they tried to ask people, how many people out there do you think are Trump supporters in your city? And and they would ask people who are Trump supporters and people who are not Trump supporters, right? Actually, this might not have been Trump. This might have just been like Republican, Democrat. I don't remember, but it was during some election cycle. What they found were that people who were Trump supporters, or whatever the equivalent was back then, were disproportionately more likely to think that like 80% of people were Trump supporters. And people who were not Trump supporters thought that Trump supporters were like exceedingly rare. They thought they were like 10% of the population, right? And the reason why they thought this is because the people they surrounded themselves with were much more likely to be like them, right? And sort of like the Facebook world, where there's this algorithm kind of like feeding you things that are more similar to you and that you'll actually engage with, right, are kind of disproportionately designed to make you feel like the world is full of Trump haters, just like you, right? Because it won't show you, a proportionate amount of posts from all the people who love Trump and think he's great, right? So you might be surprised that like, oh, there are all these like racist threads out there about Trump. It's like, I never see those. They must not exist. Well, they do. They're not getting shown to you because like you are in this circle of people. So there's this other study though that I think is also really interesting and maybe plays into the same thing, right? Is that it's a let me try and see if I can remember this. Here's what the study showed was that your friends, this is kind of weird. I might not be able to explain this that well, so I'm gonna throw that caveat in before I recount this. But basically, what they described was that your friends are likely to have more friends than you do, which seems weird, but like this is just true mathematically. Your friends are more likely to have more friends than you have friends. The reason why this is true is that most people don't have that many friends. Okay. But the people who have a lot of friends tend to have like a huge number of friends, okay? And so what you get is like this sort of clustering effect where the people who have a lot of friends tend to dominate the friends that you do end up having, because like the people who have very few friends, you're unlikely to be friends with them because they don't have that many friends, right? So most of the friends that you're going to end up having are friends who like have a lot of outgoing edges or like a lot of outgoing lines of friendships, right? And so what ends up happening is that most people are friends with really social people, because those are the people who end up making friendships to begin with, right? And so again, this sort of leads to this bias where people disproportionately think that other people have more friends than they do. This is like a very, very common social phenomenon, right? Everyone thinks that everyone has more friends than they do. And the reality is that not everybody has more friends than you do, but your average friend does have more friends than you do because they're likely to be very social people because they made friends with you.
You know, see, most people are going to need to smoke some weed to understand what you just said there, Poppy. Okay. I got to tell you, man, you got shit, man. People are going to be pausing the video.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. But so, listen, man, I can tell you get into tangents. I can tell you get into the zone, man. So I mean, I like it, man. It's interesting. So that's what I got.
So what I'm trying to say from this, the parallel I'm drawing to poker is that I think it's likely that the people who you're going to end up liking and making friends with are people who like poker and people who have fun and who are social and like who are the kind of people who are like you. Right. And I think you're very unlikely to make friends with or interact with like the people who are, you know, to quote, I think Hemingway, who are living lives of quiet desperation. Right, the people who are like in poker and they're grinding and they're making money and they hate it and like they are trapped. Well, there are people like that.
A couple more comments related to this from Charlie. What's up, Charlie Kettle, Puppy, and my buddy Daniel. What's up, Dan Devorius, man? What's up, buddy? They say Charlie says he is speaking from a very small sample size. I found poker players to be generally happy on average. It's obvious that as a mental coach, he's going to have a skewed sample. And Daniel also said, Haseeb, you realize that you being a mental game coach biases you being exposed to the worst in terms of happiness, I guess, overall.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. But this was something that I very much observed while I was a poker player, you know. Like I've had, you know, I absolutely agree. Like that's a bias to be very conscious of. But yeah, that's definitely something that I observed while I was a poker player. And I think like, honestly, if you go on an average walk through a casino and like look at the actual people who are sitting there playing, like how many of those people do you really think are like that happy with their lives, right? And like I completely believe you that the people you spend time with and the people who you actually surround yourself with are happy and like playing poker. But I think like it would be very strange if a field that was like as fraught and stressful and one also where the economy is shrinking as quickly as poker is, it's getting more and more difficult, that is full of like uncertainty and downswings and you know, like unhealthiness and living out of casinos and constant itinerancy, right? And like, it would be very strange if this was like a place that was full of happy people, you know? Like, I completely believe you that there are people who are happy, and I know them. I know many of them. I met them when I was poker players. I'm arguing, I don't know why I'm like, feels like I'm like getting my heels dug into an argument that I'm not really making. I'm not saying that like most poker players aren't happy. That's not what I'm saying. What
I mean, when you think about it though, I mean, I would imagine there are a pretty good amount of poker players who are also on the other spectrum of things. As you mentioned, the casino guys and the guys who are playing live. Like, I mean, I know some of those guys. Those guys aren't happy. So yeah. That is definitely.
There are also more and more of those people now as online poker is shrinking. You know, like people. There's a large exodus that again goes kind of unnoticed in 2+2 of like people who can't, you know, they just can't make it that high anymore on online games, and now they're like grinding MTTs or they're grinding live games, and I think most of them are not, you know, like I don't know. So some of them are happy, some of them are not.
Like moral of it is that what? So you basically think that poker does this to everybody, and
no, not at all. No, I mean there are clearly people for whom poker is exactly what they want. You know, I've met people for whom that's true. I was definitely not one of those people. You know, I like in a lot of ways, it's kind of funny, but like I think I was not born to be a gambler. You know, like in a lot of ways, even though like as a poker player, I was very risk neutral and like I was very aggressive. Like I've only spent $5 in a casino outside of a poker table. Like I didn't play blackjack, craps, anything. Like it just had no appeal whatsoever to me. But like you know, in a way, like I sort of tolerated the gambling aspect of poker and the uncertainty aspect of poker. But I would have loved poker much more if it was deterministic, you know? And I feel like most poker players, that's probably true for them, you know? There are many poker players for whom that's not true, but I'd say probably most professionals, like, yeah, I'd actually like it more if like poker were more like chess.
Interesting. I mean, I gotta say, this isn't something that we often discuss with most podcast guests. and by when I say often, I mean very, very rarely. When I say very rarely, I mean almost never. So it's certainly, I feel like you're saying a lot of things that that are going to make people think for sure. You know, I also think there's a lot of people that may be in the chat now who sort of, you know, they remember experiences with you in the past, or they remember a lot of the lies that were told during the GIRAH situation, who are a bit skeptical to sort of take anything that you say, and they always think there's some sort of potential angle behind it. There's something just not straight about it. You know what I mean?
Okay. Not straight about what I'm saying right now.
I don't know. It's just, yeah, it seems like some of the comments in the chat. I'm reading the chat. We're chatting. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Twitch right now. It just seems like some of the comments, like, I guess, yeah. You know, do you ever deal with a lot of those people now who, you know, back from the poker world, back from the poker day, from that you know from then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because like it's been what, 5 years, you know. So I was 21 when I quit poker, and I'm 26 now. And yeah, like you know, like I was mentioning before, it was a long time before I could really kind of dissociate myself from the poker community and kind of like move on and focus on trying to live my life well and like improve myself as a human being, which is you know, it's like a very very difficult and very personal thing to like try to embark on. And it's something that, you know, over time it's become very clear to me that that's not something that you can expect to, you know, like the chorus of voices is never going to give a shit about that. And that's okay. Like, you know, the people in the poker community who hate me, I respect that, you know, like I did really awful things while I was a poker player, or at least during the course of the GIRAH scandal. And those are things that like it absolutely makes sense not to trust somebody who lied to the poker community, which is what I did. Yeah. So I get it. And that said, it's not something that I want to court because, like, as a human being, and I can, and you know, the thing that I sense is that like people don't really care anymore about me, right? Like they don't care about the effect that any of this stuff has on me, which is fine. That's the way the internet works. No one, you know, I'm sure that if I met these people in person and actually talked to them, they wouldn't just like be spewing invectives at me. They would like, you know, potentially like actually want to tell me something like, hey, it's fucked up that you did this. Here's what I think you can do to make it right. Or here's what I think you should do with yourself. Or here's, you know, my take on how X, Y, or Z can be done, right? Something like that. It's actually a conversation. But you can't, you know, you can't have a conversation with the internet, you know, like the internet doesn't talk to people. It just sort of swallows them up. And so, yeah, that is what it is, you know? And I think it's taught me a tremendous amount. And it's like really, really, I don't know, like it has really challenged me. It's challenged my confidence, and it's also challenged my ability to just like, to kind of be like, all right, cool, you know, people think this shit about me, cool. I'm gonna go and like move on with my life and just like soldier forward and do the shit that I have to do. And that's yeah. That's I think that's all there is to it.
I mean, I guess what other stance can you take in that situation? You know, how else can you look at it?
Well, I spent a lot of time not looking at it that way. You know, I spent a lot of time really like deliberating and trying to internalize things that people were telling me, and you just can't. You know, it's just it's paralyzing. Like it's just not something that human beings are designed to deal with. And I think a lot of people get that. People in poker don't get that, and I can tell they don't care. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. So anyway, I guess to like finish the final chapter of my story, which presumably has some relevance to like why you wanted to bring me on to your show. So when I published my book, the book ended up doing really well. It like sold like got to the #1 on Amazon for I think like 6 months or something. And at the same time, I decided to kind of start over. So I decided to give away the money that I made as a poker player. So I think around that time, I had saved around $500,000 that I was living off of at the time. And I decided to give all of it away. So most of it ended up giving away to my parents and the rest of my family. And I think $75K I donated to charity. And at the time, like this was actually at the very beginning that I was starting to get exposed to this set of ideas called effective altruism, which you guys familiar with REG? R-E-G?
It's this whole entire concept idea. I've had a couple people on that are with Reg, and they've talked about it. It's definitely gaining a lot of momentum in the poker world.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was around 2013 that I started really getting exposed to effective altruism. And for those who don't know, just a super brief summary of effective altruism. Effective altruism is basically the idea of thinking about altruism and thinking about doing good in the world in a very rigorous and scientific way. And so basically thinking, instead of doing things that appear good or that feel good or that are socially sanctioned or that, confer whatever benefits that most people use to make decisions or for just emotional reasons, you should try to actually think rigorously about how is this actually impacting the suffering in the world and organize your life around that principle. And that's basically the idea of effective altruism. So it seems uncontroversial, but it's actually very controversial. In a lot of different ways, it makes people do very unconventional things. And so one of the things that I came across, I think around this time I just graduated and finally got my degree, which ended up being in English. But I was exposed to this idea that was called earning to give. And the idea of earning to give is basically, here's essentially the way the argument goes. So most people think that if you want to live an altruistic life, what you should do is go out on the front lines and try to help as many people as possible. So, one obvious example of a career people might do is all right, why don't you go become a doctor, right? Doctors save people's lives, great, noble profession, great, go do it. The problem with that though is that if you go and become a doctor, chances are, unless you're some kind of super genius doctor, you're going to be about as good as the average doctor, right? Presumably, there's no reason to inherently assume that because you want to be a doctor, you're going to be way better than the average doctor. So if you're the average doctor, then let's imagine that you didn't become a doctor. Sort of we sort of cut out that part of your life and we just pretend the world is going to run without you doing that action, right? Well, what will end up happening is that somebody else will end up becoming a doctor instead of you, right? Because being a doctor is it's an elastic market. It's replaceable. Because there are a lot of people who want to be doctors, and there are not enough jobs for in hospitals, right? Are you following?
I'm a little lost right now. I got to be honest.
A little lost.
I'm a little lost. I'm trying to, man. I'm a little.
Okay. Let me see if I can simplify.
I got 4 things, but I'm trying to follow this one, man.
Okay. Let me see if I can simplify. So the idea is if you didn't become a doctor, someone else would be a doctor instead. Okay. Very simple idea. Because there's just a lot of people wanting to be doctors, right? This is just true. There are a lot of people trying to get into med school, a lot of people out of med school trying to become doctors. And so the idea is that, yes, if you became a doctor, you would do all these life-saving operations, right? But if you didn't become a doctor, then someone else would be a doctor and they would do those same life-saving operations, right? It's not as though the patient would just have sat on a table and died because you didn't become a doctor. Because of this elasticity in the market, because of this replaceability of what you wanted to do, in fact, if you think about it in a utilitarian perspective, you're not actually changing anything. You're not actually saving any lives that wouldn't otherwise be saved if you didn't do this action or you didn't pursue this career, which is very counterintuitive. Most people don't think about impact this way. But if you think rigorously about it, then it's okay, well, I shouldn't do things if someone else would do them anyway, right? So what are things that someone else wouldn't do anyway? So again, you might think of an example okay, what about going to the Peace Corps, right? Maybe if I join the Peace Corps, that's something that people wouldn't otherwise do. Well, actually, there's a huge wait list of people who want to join the Peace Corps. So that's an even worse example. But you might think okay, fuck all that stuff. Peace Corps, doctor, all right, these are crowded spaces, right? I can't make a difference marginally there. What I'll do instead is I'll go out and just go out on the ground and I'll build my own nonprofit somewhere in Africa, right? Cool. That makes sense. That's an impactful thing to do. But the idea is, one of the things that makes it hard to start a nonprofit somewhere is money, right? Raising money, because it's really hard to raise money, and there aren't that many people who give that much money, and especially they don't give very much money to high impact charities. They tend to give money wherever is close to them. And so the idea is, what if you went out and became, for example, a lawyer? And as a lawyer, you made $160K a year, whatever lawyers make, and you donate half of that to charity. Well, instead of going out and starting that nonprofit yourself, you can fund somebody else who's trying to start that nonprofit and actually have the exact same impact that you would have had if you'd gone out and started it yourself. And in fact, if you can make more than 160K, if you can make 200K or whatever, you can fund 2 or fund 3 people or 10 people, right? Because the idea is, One is that in a first world economy like in the United States, or especially in a thing like playing poker professionally, it's really weird that you can make so much fucking money doing something that's actually not that much harder than like things that people in Africa do, right? It's not as though like being a lawyer or like being a poker player is like hundreds or thousands of times harder than like mining for coal in Kenya, right? It's just not true. It has nothing to do with how hard it is or how difficult it is to do that thing. It's purely a matter of like these weird economic inequalities that are just like the sort of the landscape of our economy. So the insight then is, okay, what if you take advantage of that? Most people in the world can't take advantage of it. Most people in the world know that that's true, that people in the United States can do work that's not like 100 times harder than what people in Africa do, but they get paid 1,000 times more. But they can't do anything about it. But as somebody who lives in the first world and somebody who has access to these economic markets, you absolutely can do something about it, right? You are in fact one of the only people who can do something about it. You can go and take advantage of this sort of economic disparity and reroute it to a place where it can do much more good in the world than it would otherwise do, right? So to take that marginal argument back, if you didn't become a lawyer, someone else would become a lawyer, and they would probably not give anything to charity because most lawyers give like a very small percentage of their income to charity. But if you become a lawyer and do this, then money that would otherwise just get rerouted back into the consumer economy actually leaves that economy and does some good. And ideally does like very high impact good. And that's the argument for earning to give. Okay. So I apologize if that was complicated, but that's I tried to sort of distill it to its essence. And so when I read that argument, I was like, shit, that makes sense. Like I can't argue with that. That I accept that argument, and I am going to try to change my life to reflect what that argument demands. And so I decided that I was going to pursue a career where I could make, have a high earning potential so that I could give more money to charity. And so that's eventually how I ended up coming out into tech and getting a job in the tech industry. Because it was a place where I realized that I could gain an outsized income really quickly and donate a lot of that money to charity. So right now, I initially started with pledging 33% of my pre-tax income to charity. So every year I donate a third to high impact charities. So last year, so like eventually my goal is to give 50%, so half of everything I make. But I want to save up some money before then. And so that's what spurred me to go out into tech. It seems like maybe this is a good time to stop and get your feedback. I don't want to be talking too long without hearing your thoughts.
Kid, I mean, hey, I mean, I'm enjoying what you're saying. I mean, this is okay. It's interesting shit. I mean, it's not like some of the typical podcasts, but it's still pretty fucking interesting, man. So, okay. I'm just enjoying what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, go ahead, just keep going. I'm just following along here.
Sure thing. I'm just trying to get a vibe on where you're at.
No, that's all good.
So cool. Yeah. So then I decided that I was going to join a coding bootcamp. And people who are not familiar, a coding bootcamp is like it's basically like generally there are 12-week programs. They can be sometimes longer or shorter. And they essentially teach you usually all the basics of web development in like a really, really contracted program where it's like, it's extremely intense. It's generally like 80 to 90 hours a week. So basically it's like, you're sort of live, eating, and breathing code for about 3 months. So it's really intense. Generally they cost, 15K plus, something like that. And then by the end of it, like a lot of people end up getting jobs because there's such huge demand in the tech industry for especially web developers. So I was like, okay, this thing makes sense because I want to go out in tech. I want to go out into the world of entrepreneurship. This is a place where I feel like I can have a lot of impact and high earning potential. So cool. I kind of decided one day that I was going to do this. I applied to every single bootcamp in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley. I ended up getting into my top choice, which was App Academy. And I never really coded before. So I did a year in high school of Java. And so this is back when I was like 13, 14, something like that. And then never touched it again. So I had basically forgotten all of it. And I essentially like learned as much as I could over the course of like a couple weeks so I could get into these coding boot camps. Finally got into App Academy. App Academy is like the top one in San Francisco for the Rails stack, which if you don't know what that is, it's just like a web development framework. Went into App Academy. I sort of grinded my ass off for about a couple months. They ended up hiring me to come on as an instructor on the course. So I was like at the top of my cohort. I was really, really good. And I think it was interesting when I they hired me to like help teach the course, which is like a common practice. They often
Wait,
hire the people.
you get hired that quick? That's common though.
Yeah. So basically, what they do is they generally hire the top student or top couple students to help teach the course. And initially, you start off as a teaching assistant, and then eventually become an instructor. So originally, the plan was to have me come on as a teaching assistant, but then that really quickly changed once I started working, because I just started taking on a lot of responsibility and like kind of pushing myself forward. And so I remember actually during the negotiation, it was interesting because they were like, oh yeah, we want to bring you on, and like eventually you can become an instructor, but you're going to start off as like these more TA type duties. And I was like, oh, that's great, that's really cool, but actually I have a lot of experience.
Oh, got lagging. Might have lag. Might have a frozen Haseeb. I think so. Oh, we got some shout outs if he's frozen. I'm not sure. Let me check Facebook here. Who we got in the chat? Hold on. We got shout outs here, boys. Hold on a second. I think so. All right. Let's give a couple shout outs. Let's go. Who we got? Let's see. Balky, what's up, buddy? Puppy. I'm throwing off right now. Wim, what's up, Wim? Puppy. Justin. Ralph Anesi. My boy Daniel D'Agostino. What's up, Daniel? What else we got? Sean Meredith. Balky. No Ears 99. Vanoff, Uno Shark 100. Okay, who else we got? Let's see. Dimitar N. Charlie Carroll. What's up, Charlie? Puppy. Matt L. I'm sure a lot of you guys are grinding scoop while you listen to this. Hope it's bringing you the podcast run good. That typically comes from the podcast. I can't look at my hair in this lighting, honest to God. I'm just tilting every time I look at my hair. Wim, what's up, Wim? Corey's my 91, puppy. Let's see who else we got. Who else we got in here? Bodie Alexander, what's up, Bodie? Paul, 21JH2. My boy Daniel, what's up, Daniel, puppy? The Ox. I've been listening for a while, and the last 30 seconds have been most enjoyable. Come on, puppy. Katrina, what's up? Is that a woman? Katrina Michnik. Hey. All right, you back?
I'm back. Sorry about that. What was the last thing that I said before it cut out?
We were freezing. You were talking about getting into the Code Academy, becoming the best one or two get to become the instructors, and yes. Then that's pretty much where you left off at.
Yeah. So anyway, in my negotiation with them, I ended up like being like, hey, I'd like to take on more responsibility, and they were like, cool. So I negotiated a short contract. 3 months later, I was like, all right, cool. I have this short contract with them. I'm going to go and like do an actual job search now and like try to find a job as a developer. When they saw that I was potentially leaving, they were like, hey, actually, we really, really want you to come on full-time and be a full-time instructor with us and be one of our lead instructors. And I was like, actually, I don't really want to teach. I want to build stuff and like I want to kind of grow in the tech world. And so they were like, okay, what would you be interested in doing here? And I was like, well, if you could put me in charge of product and give me such and such responsibilities, then I'd be down with joining. And so basically I kind of carved out this role for myself as director of product. And I ended up signing with App Academy, and I worked there for about 10 months. So I worked as basically my role as director of product was kind of a mix of sort of product leadership and like deciding kind of how the bootcamp should offer new different kinds of courses, selling things like corporate training, different approaches and monetization strategies for the bootcamp. I also did like exploring different kinds of software that we could build. I also was an instructor, so I was actually like teaching and lecturing and working with the students directly. And then I was also doing software development. So I was actually writing a lot of our code that we had. So, App Academy has like two big systems that we use. We have like an applicant tracking system. So App Academy gets like, I think we get like 15 to 20,000 applications a year, and they're all like, it's like, and we accept something like 5% of people. So it's like, it's on the scale of like Harvard Business School. Like we have like a lot of throughput that goes through our funnel. So like, I guess you seem surprised, but App Academy is like it's basically like the top coding bootcamp in New York City, and like tied with the top coding bootcamp in San Francisco, which is Hack Reactor. So App Academy, like there are a lot of people. The other thing about App Academy that makes it very desirable is that App Academy has this 18% tuition plan. So basically the idea is that you don't pay them your tuition. So usually tuition, like for example, at Hack Reactor General Assembly, it's like $15,000 or $18,000 that you have to pay, like cash. At App Academy, the way it works is that if you don't get a job, you don't pay us anything, and you only pay 18% of your first year's income if you in fact do get a job. So because of that, like it's hugely popular, right? Like you can kind of imagine. It like, attracts a huge international crowd. There are a lot of people across the States who are like, oh, I want to break into web development. This is a really easy way to do it. I don't have that kind of capital. So it's part of the reason why App Academy is really, really competitive, is because it has this revenue model that's no other company except Full Stack Academy in New York City.
So wait, so you took the course there. You're one of the top 1 or 2. They brought you in as an instructor, and then 10 months later, you were able to move up to the director of product.
No. I moved up to director of product 3 months after I was hired.
3 months after you're hired.
3 months after I was hired. Yeah.
3 months. I mean, it seems like a pretty big place. It seems. I mean, you'd think they'd have people in there that were.
A big place. It's like it was like 18-person startup. I mean, it's not that big now. It's like 30 something. I mean, it might seem like a big place, but like, I mean.
Well, you mentioned the number of applicants you get in there. So I guess when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that they probably have people that have been there for a while. I mean, is this a newer place? Is it a newer company?
I mean, the company has been around like 3 years. Like most of these coding bootcamps are fairly new. Like coding bootcamps haven't really existed more than like 4 or 5 years. So most coding bootcamps are around the same age. Like they're not. This is not something that's been around for a long time.
So basically, what you're saying is that someone who's new, like yourself, that comes in, could pick it up and know just as much as some other guys who have been involved with it because it's only been around for a couple of years.
It depends on what you mean by it. Like, I mean, that's
pick it up in terms of being able to be someone who's at that position, who's able to be one of the instructors and then get hired on and then sort of rise up in the ranks that fast.
I mean, I was definitely an anomaly. Like, I think a lot of it was just that like the founders, like they thought that I'd be a good person to give responsibility to, and that like I had good judgment, I guess.
Well,
about a lot of
I mean, if you were talking to them a lot, I mean, you're a pretty convincing person, so I could understand that. I mean, just listening to you, I'm sure they're like, oh, this, I mean, it makes sense. I can definitely, it makes sense.
I mean, the thing is, like, I was working very closely with them during the time that I was like in those 3 months when I was sort of a TA/instructor, where I was kind of like middling these roles. And the things that were really clear is that like, one, I was really technically sharp because I was just like putting a shitload of time in. Like I was basically, I mean, it's maybe easy, like it's easy to think like it's really sensational because like, oh, it's 3 months, or like, oh, you're only learning this for this amount of time. But like, honestly, the actual like literal number of hours that I was spending, where I was like living out of a very tiny room in San Francisco, like a fucking, like it was like a 200 square foot room, bunk bed, with like another guy living in the room with me. Like I was basically at App Academy every single day for 3 months, just coding, learning CS, learning algorithms. And like most people, even people who are going through the program don't do that. So I think a large part of it, like it actually is not that impressive. I mean, like, it might still be impressive, but it's not that like sensational if you just count like literally the number of hours that I was spending actually doing this stuff. Like the average CS student, I mean, people like to make this comparison. The average computer science student spends around, what is it? It's like 10,000 or 12,000 hours actually doing like computer science coursework over their degree. And the average App Academy student spends about 10,000 hours. Or no, I'm sorry, not 10,000, 1,000. The average CS student spends about 1,200 hours. And the average App Academy student or bootcamp at like a very, very intense bootcamp, like Hack Reactor, App Academy, Full Stack Academy, where like you're basically drinking from a fire hose for 3 months straight. Those bootcamps are, the average student generally gets in about 1,000 hours of coding experience by the time they're done, which is like a lot, which is comparable to somebody who's like been doing this over a CS degree.
So then it's so back to, so at that point, so when did that, because I read a bunch of the Airbnb stuff. I guess I just read that Yahoo article just to prepare for this, and just reading some of the comments from people in that community, they seem like, it seemed like that they made it out as that you spent 12 weeks and then you got the job at Airbnb doing.
Yeah, which is completely wrong. Like
that sounds,
all of these articles,
sounds much different than that. Yeah,
all of the articles were like really stupidly written, and it's funny because like I wrote the blog. If you read the blog post, like it's really fucking clear the narrative, but it seems like people don't want to actually read the blog post, so they just like read this like horrible summary that's completely inaccurate, written by Business Insider, which like it's weird because they like picked up the story randomly 10 days after I wrote it, and they got tons of shit wrong. So
Did Yahoo post it first, or did Business Insider post it first?
No, Business Insider posted it. Yahoo literally just resyndicated the Business Insider post.
Okay.
I mean, like, I don't know if you actually have seen Yahoo News, but all they do is resyndicate posts. They don't actually, like, I don't think they even have any original content anymore.
Well, I assume a lot of Business Insider stuff wasn't original as well. They just took it from someplace else too. So I wasn't sure if...
That's definitely true. They definitely do that sometimes. But as far as I know, the Business Insider article was the first to report on the story. I think it's because it hit Hacker News, which people don't know. It's like a big news aggregator site for a lot of people in the tech industry. And then from there, it got picked up by Business Insider, and then it sort of spiraled from there.
The base of the article was that you negotiated a higher salary from using Yelp and Airbnb, sort of, I guess, as opponents. I mean, you can tell the.
Yeah. So again, like the understanding of the story is like very, very stupid. Like it just like they're completely wrong in how they tell the story. So basically, the story was, when I, as director of product, I was doing this for a while, and I realized that like more and more of my responsibilities were moving away from software engineering and more towards the business side of the company. And I came into tech fundamentally because like I was really interested in software, and I was like this, even like the teaching and stuff like that. Like I'm fundamentally teaching the same material because it's a boot camp, right? So the curriculum is fixed for the most part, and so that was deeply unsatisfying to me. And I was like, I need to move on. Like it just is what it is. I got to move on and like find a place where I can be more challenged and work directly with more cutting edge software. So I decided to leave and start doing a job search. I'd never really done my job search. Like they sort of cut it short initially when they offered me the role as director of product. So I kind of like picked up where I left off, which was very, very unfinished. Like finished up my resume, projects, like all that stuff, prepared for interviews. And then I started sending out applications. I didn't get any bites. I sent like 20 plus applications, and not a single company wanted to talk to me, which is actually not an uncommon experience for people who go through boot camps. That's pretty much the norm. But it kind of surprised me because I was like, oh, I have this like instructor experience, and most of the guys who I know who've been instructors or even just TAs at App Academy have a really, really easy time jumping into industry. So it kind of freaked me out. I was like, what the hell is going on? And so I started instead deciding, okay, maybe because my background is so weird, like I have this poker background, I have an English major. My role is also like not obviously software. It's like director of product, which sounds more of a businessy role than it sounds like a software role, even though I was like very involved with the software and the teaching side. And so I was like, maybe this is the problem. So I decided to start kind of aiming more for referrals and like networking with people rather than just going for raw applications, right? Because very often a lot of these raw applications are just kind of weeded out algorithmically. So basically there's like a checklist of keywords that they're looking for, and if they don't have them, then you like literally no human being ever looks at your resume. So I was just like, all right, what I'll do instead is I'll have all these students who are working now at companies. I'll talk to them. And so I started reaching out to students and getting referrals at companies, blah, blah, blah. And again, like I tell the story with more pizzazz, but essentially the short version is that I start getting offers through just actually like landing interviews, talking to recruiters, doing well in interviews, sort of moving up the chain. I interviewed at a lot of different companies. I finally end up interviewing at Google, and I get the offer. Then I interview at, where did I get? I got offers from TripleByte, Stripe, Uber, Yelp, Google, and one other company, Gusto. And then finally, my last interview ended up being at Airbnb. And at the time, I was pretty set on Google. I thought Google was clearly going to be the best choice. And they would offer me a spot on the YouTube team, which seemed really attractive, especially because YouTube is like one of the few like tech products that I actually use. And also just because like it sounded like really interesting technical work. But then I interviewed at Airbnb. I really, really loved it. The people seemed really amazing, like the company, the mission, all that stuff. Like I've used Airbnb since like 2011, I want to say. And like I've always really dug the whole sharing economy thing, like things like couch surfing and whatnot. So it was really, really, I really felt like aligned with a lot of stuff the company was doing. And then they ended up making me like an extremely strong offer. I negotiated up, and then I took the offer. And that's essentially the story. So when I tell it this way, it doesn't quite sound so extravagant and insane, but like the Business Insider article, just like fucking, it's just garbage. It's
Let's see. Can I bring you on as my personal negotiator for anything I need negotiated? Please, I mean, Tell me what I gotta pay. I'm serious. I'm bringing you on, man. I'll give you the fee, man. You can take all the extra money. I just want to see you negotiate something for me. I feel like you could get me a lot of money too. I'm terrible at negotiation, man. I can tell you're very, very GTO when it comes to.
Why do you think you're terrible at negotiation?
I don't have much negotiation experience. I don't really negotiate things. I guess, being a poker player for the last 8-9 years, never really had. I've been doing well at poker most times, and I wasn't doing well. I was maybe degenerate, so I didn't necessarily care about negotiating. I was just like, whatever.
Sure.
It's what the cost of doing business is, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's funny because like a lot of people think that negotiating is a lot like poker, and I think like in a lot of ways it is kind of similar, but there are definitely very, very big differences between like being a good negotiator and being a good poker player. Because like most poker players I know, I think are terrible negotiators. Like it's somehow like it's almost like poker makes you worse at negotiating in a lot of ways, the way that most people play it. But yeah, it's an interesting subject for sure.
Yeah, I guess it could make you worse at it because you devalue money less. You don't just care. You don't care what you're paying. You're just like, oh, whatever, fuck it. Like that like desire to save money sort of goes away as you become a poker player and you're playing higher stakes and you're used to gambling and being an overall sort of degenerate. And
that's somewhat true. That's somewhat true. But I mean, you might also think like at the same time, like, well, a poker player should be like primed not to leave EV on the table.
I guess that's true.
Like one of the tenets of poker, isn't it? So I don't know. It's interesting. It's curious. I don't really know why poker players are so bad at it. I think one of the big things that honestly it comes down to is like, a lot of people think that like being good at negotiating is about like being really adversarial and really tough. But in fact, like that's one of the worst ways to negotiate. And in the vast majority of contexts, like those kind of negotiators are the worst. Like they suck. Negotiating well is really a lot about like empathy and understanding like what is motivating and what is motivating the person on the other side of the table. Like what do they actually want? What do they actually care about? Why are they negotiating this thing with you?
So are you allowed to talk about your experience with shout out to Airbnb, the PR, if you're watching and you're wondering why I got blue hair and I'm wearing this jacket, I'm in this bedroom. What's up, man? Shout out to Airbnb P&R if they're watching. But are you allowed to talk about the negotiation potential, anything with that a little bit? Or
I mean, there's definitely like stuff that's confidential that I can't talk about. So
we don't want to break any contract terms of service. We don't want you got a nice offer. It looks like, but although it seems like you got other offers at the table too. So
sure, yeah, I'm perfectly happy to talk about negotiation in general. That's not a problem.
Okay. Well, I guess in that situation, when you talk about understanding, what the person wants you're negotiating with, I guess in that situation, if you're negotiating for a job, so you're trying to understand how much they want you, how much they like.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like a lot of people, so there are two kinds of negotiations, right? There are zero-sum negotiations where like, if I get more, you get less, right? And that's like there's only one dimension essentially of value. And that's like very similar to poker, right? Poker is very zero-sum, where for the most part, if I get EV, it's because you're losing it. It's very hard for us to like create EV out of nothing or to destroy EV because both of us made bad decisions. That doesn't really happen in poker. But in negotiation, like in the real world, that happens all the time. Like we're basically treating a negotiation as zero sum is one, if you treat negotiations as zero sum, then your strategy is generally going to be like super aggressive and very, very like immediately optimizing, like really hardcore, like, no, I need this much and I won't sign unless you give me that. Right? Like that is the approach of somebody who thinks that they're in a zero-sum negotiation. And that can be effective if the negotiation is genuinely zero-sum. But most negotiations are not zero-sum, meaning that there are different dimensions of value that are sort of like moving past each other in different ways, right? So here's an example. For a company, like for you as a candidate, if you're like interviewing at a company, right? And I know that most poker players don't. Like this may be orthogonal to most poker players' experience, but I'll use this as an example because it's what you're asking about. For most companies, not all money is created equal. But for you, all money is created equal, right? Because I mean, you don't really care where the money comes from. But for a company to offer you salary, as opposed to offering you stock, as opposed to offering you a signing bonus, as opposed to offering you a relocation bonus, those things actually have different value to them. And if you don't actually ask and understand that or understand why those things are differently valued, you'll never realize that. And you'll say, I want $30,000 more in salary, right? And this is how much I want, and you got to give it to me, otherwise I won't sign, right? That's horrible negotiating, right? But if you like take time to understand what actually the other person values and what the way their incentives are constructed, then you can realize that actually it's much easier for a company to give you a signing bonus than to give you salary.
So that's why in the Airbnb thing that you have, you negotiated, I think the salary was a certain amount, the signing bonus, and then there was something else that I didn't Google the word, but it seemed like the people had very, very different opinions on exactly what that meant, which is tied with the stock, I believe, right? What is it?
It's basically stock units.
Okay, and it seemed like some people on the internet were saying those are fucking worthless; they don't mean shit, and some people are like, that's a good thing to have. So it's like an unknown variable in terms of how much it will actually be.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, especially like to hear poker players talking about that, because like that's just really stupid, right? Like, so in RSU,
this wasn't in a poker setting. This was actually
general people are even stupider than poker players. So, like, I would not trust the level of intelligence of people like commenting on Business Insider. So like, first of all, a lot of people don't even know what an RSU is, and they're like, oh, RSUs are meaningless. So an RSU is not the same thing as a stock option, which I think a lot of people are misunderstanding. An RSU is a grant of stock. It basically means I will give you stock in this company, and if the company ever goes public or gets sold or goes bankrupt or whatever, you will get to cash out this portion. Like, this portion of the company belongs to you now. And at any point it gets cashed out, you will get that money, right? You now own a part of the business. That is what an RSU is, right? So the number of RSUs that you are given is by definition a bet, right? Because the company cannot be sold yet. It hasn't been sold. It cannot be converted into cash. So you know, and there are usually third-party markets you can use, but it's complicated, and like, you know, for the most part, these things are illiquid. You know, so basically, what that means is that you are taking a bet on this company. The value of this bet, the EV, is whatever you ascribe to be the cash value of those RSUs, right? So when I say, like, you know, 50K in RSUs, that means that the cash value at the current value of this company, if it got sold today, would be this much. This is how much cash I would make, right?
So if it never goes public, do you ever get the money?
So if it never goes public, something has to happen, right? It has to go bankrupt. It has to get acquired. Something has to happen. It can't just like float in private. Potentially it could float in private mode forever, right? But then you would just own that stock forever, and you could potentially also sell it, right? Okay. So there are also like liquidation events outside of an IPO where some of that can be liquidated. And you can also always sell things on third-party markets, and they're like sort of gray markets where you can be like, hey, I don't want to wait until an IPO. Will you buy this thing from me at like a discount, right? For my increased liquidity and you getting to, you know, sort of invest in Airbnb at a discount or whatever. So you shouldn't do this in a company that doesn't allow you to do so. And, you know, different companies have different policies on whether or not that's okay. But so that's how stock works. So like, as a poker player, it should be really obvious that like RSUs, so long as you think that the company is valued somewhat correctly, or like, I mean, first of all, if you think that you know a tremendous amount more about how the company is valued, then you should already be like a billionaire in the stock market. Like, you would be a genius if you knew that, right? I don't think anybody out there on the internet commenting knows that, because if they do, then they'll be able to make a lot more money with their other powers of prescience on being able to predict which companies are overvalued and undervalued. So I don't assume, which I think is a pretty good position to be in, that like I have enough information to know what's undervalued and what's overvalued. That's a fool's game if you don't actually have as much information as the company has on how it's doing, right? Or the investors, who are literally the people who created that price. Right. The value of stock is determined by the investors, and investors are generally pretty smart, and they know exactly how much money the company is making. So I don't assume that I know more about this company than the investors do. So I'm going to assume, which is what anybody should assume, that the value of stock, if I don't care about liquidity, is exactly sort of the current cash value if it got sold, right? You have to do some discounting for the fact that like you can't liquidate it for a while, it doesn't gain interest, et cetera, right? There's some discounting that you have to do. But for the most part, like, it's, if you are risk neutral and you don't care about liquidity, then it is as good as cash. And if that's true, and the company cares less about giving that out. So things that companies don't care much about giving out on are signing bonuses and stock. Right, signing bonuses are easy to give out because they're one-time things and they never have to pay them again. So that's really easy to do. And secondly, because it doesn't affect the dynamics of salary, right? So salary is like this weird thing where people jockey with each other, people get mad, people want raises, whatever. They have like these predefined bands that they don't want to break. But with a signing bonus, they can be like, all right, cool, we'll just give you a lot of money up front, and then you'll just be in the system now for the salary bands, right? And so that makes it really easy for a company. But you as a candidate, presumably you don't care, right? Like, it makes no difference to you. But if it makes it easier for the company to reward you, then great, ask for that instead of the salary, right? Same thing with stock. Stock is really easy to give because the company has a lot of stock, and it incentivizes you to stay longer. And so they're like, cool, we'll absolutely give you stock because it'll incentivize, like, the incentives align for us, so we can give you more value there than we can by giving you salary. So that's like one. It's a fairly small point, but I think it's an important one that like a lot of people don't think about when they negotiate.
I think you know, most people were poker players, but I feel like there's gonna be a couple people who might listen to that who actually they think about that a lot, and they're gonna get jobs. I mean, a lot of poker players are gonna have to get jobs at some point in time. They're not gonna poker. Yeah. I mean,
a lot of poker players already do. Like a lot of, I mean, that's one thing that people don't talk that much about. But like a lot of poker players are like working and playing poker on the side.
Yeah, but you don't play poker anymore, right? You don't play.
No, I haven't played any poker in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you miss playing poker? It seems like you kind of, I mean, it seems like in a way you would like to be playing poker again, but at the same time you realize that you think it was very unhealthy for you and you don't necessarily think you can just dive in small or be a little bit in. You sort of.
I don't agree with that. No, I think like, I mean, a lot of times it's funny. Like I have a lot of dreams where I'm playing poker. That happens a lot. But I think it's like, you know, the same thing, like you'll have dreams that you're like in high school again and like, oh, you've got this term paper due, right? I think I didn't have a lot of dreams like that. But you know, when I wake up and like I realize like, oh no, I'm not a professional poker player anymore. Like it's almost always a relief. Like it's very rarely that I'm like, man, I want to play poker again. You know, especially knowing how much worse things have gotten. You know, and like how much less fertile the economy is, like how worse game selection is, and like actually getting to play when you log on, and like I don't know, seating scripts and all that crazy shit, right? Like when I loved poker was when I was like moving up through the stakes when I was like 18 years old, grinding heads up games, you know, like getting to play whoever I wanted, constantly getting to play against stronger and stronger players. Like that's what I loved about poker. And that I think is like you said it yourself, like that's not what poker is like that much anymore.
That's not what online poker is like anymore. Yeah, for sure. That's
and that was you know the only thing that if I have some nostalgia, it's for this thing that is clearly not really the experience anymore of online poker.
Guys in the chat, I know you guys have been leaving a lot of comments and questions. If you guys have some questions, we'll get a couple questions in. I know I saw a couple. I mean, I probably have a couple about the GIRAH thing. Was that guy? So is he a real person? The GIRAH, the alleged Portuguese prodigy, is he actually exist? You ever met him? You ever seen him like on video? Like, are you sure he exists? He really exists?
I mean, this is an insane question. He literally did video interviews for Lock Poker.
Okay.
He was like in photo shoots. He like, you know, he's been in the news in Portugal various times after he quit poker.
Okay, I didn't follow him with that close, so I wasn't sure. But I mean, it sounded like you might not have met him, or you might not have.
No, I met him when I went to Portugal. I actually met him in person.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of insane, but yeah, I actually met him in person.
Fucking GIRAH, man. That whole thing was fucking. I mean,
it's weird too because like I don't know, meeting him was such a weird experience because like I didn't know how to feel about him, you know, because he was like somebody who I cared a lot about, and then somebody clearly who had completely deceived me, you know. He deceived a lot of people in the poker world, but like a lot of things, you know, one thing that people don't realize is that like he lied about tons of shit to me and Jungle that we had no idea about. You know, the entire thing about the original post of him, like someone being like, oh, there's some poker prodigy out on the loose, that was actually him who had wrote that. And so like he had some kind of weird impulse from the very beginning to like try to control things and like manufacture his own narrative. And I didn't know how much of that, you know, it's like, I don't know, it's like you know, it's like meeting like a con artist, right? It's like, I have this image of this kid where like I've seen him struggle. I've like advised him on poker, advised him on his life. Like we've been through a lot of shit together. And on the other hand, I just now realized like he's been lying through his teeth to me for a long, long time. And, you know, in large part because of my faith in him, like my poker career has just fucking gone off the deep end. And I was like really angry at him. But yeah.
So whatever happened with the money, did you ever get any money back? Did he ever get any money, or like what?
No, so he paid everybody back. He paid everybody back.
So he did pay everybody back.
He did. He actually did it like within the first couple of days. So that was like very, very fast. But yeah, the money thing, yeah, honestly, I ended up losing a lot of money because of the GIRAH scandal, which was very strange. It was not what I was expecting. But basically, like GIRAH didn't pay us for like the stake that he had taken out. And then some other guy, it's a long story, but some other guy ended up stealing money from me, and nobody cared because I was a scammer. And so people already reviled me, and so it didn't really bother that some guy had cheated me who was like of some standing in the poker community. This guy Jason Burt, Plastic Cards. He's probably not still around, but
Yeah, I think so.
I think he stole like 80K from me.
So
And,
so basically GIRAH was doing the stuff, the team he was, just, I mean, that's pretty bad in terms of things. So he was getting people, his friends, to play someone he said was a fish because he was playing them, but it was actually him.
Yeah.
Fucked up. And he was watching both sides. He's watching both sides. I mean, that's
yeah.
Why would
I remember him saying,
but yeah, when you find that out, I mean, isn't that something like, I don't know, it just seems like that would be something where it's like a tie sort of thing with a person, like, let me end this relationship as soon as I can, because like that's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I don't think that's like the first instinct of anybody. I think the first instinct is like, why did you do this? You know, it's like to want to understand like what the fuck happened, that like you had all this stuff going for you. You were like this really successful player, and you did something that was like so stupid, and you like not even, it's like the most childish way.
Well, he's a child. He's 17, 18 at the time. He's a child.
Yeah. I know. I mean, maybe that shouldn't be surprising, but like, I mean, he was a good poker player, but that was just like, I don't know. Like, there's something that was like, to me, I just didn't understand why he did it, and that was more mystifying to me than anything else, And yeah, like I remember, yeah. It's something that I think a lot about, right? Because like, so now, I mean, I haven't talked with GIRAH in like, I don't know, I want to say like 3 years, 4 years. But I know that he like, people have told me that like there's stories about him now in Portuguese news, where he's like an entrepreneur out there. He's like building businesses. He runs like an MMA gym somewhere in Lisbon. I think Lisbon. And like he's like fucking moving on with his life, and he's just, he kind of, I don't know what to think about that. It's like,
I mean, it's just like all scammers have to move on with their life somehow. So,
well, it's just like life goes on,
right?
And like people, yeah, it's like, that's the thing, that like, I don't know if GIRAH is a bad person, and I think everybody, assumes that if someone does something like scam somebody, that they're fundamentally a bad person. But I don't know. I just don't really believe in like the idea of like a fundamentally bad or a fundamentally good person. Like, I think there are people who are fucked up. There are people who like, have psychological or mental debilitations. But, it seemed like, it's like somebody, what do I want to say? I don't know. This is probably a really bad idea for me to start talking about this. But yeah, no, you know what? Fuck it. Like, I'm just gonna say it. Is that like I reject this idea that like people who do things that are wrong and people who like make really horrible mistakes, like GIRAH did, are evil. It's not obvious to me that GIRAH is evil. I think that he did a really stupid thing. I think that he did something that was like really childish and really, really bad and really wrong and really evil, right? But do I think that like he's now fundamentally an evil person? No, I don't know that. I don't know him enough to know that. And yeah, maybe people will be like, oh, well, that's an absurd claim to make. But yeah, I think that I know enough people who've done things that like they aren't proud of and that they learned from, Like, I think that's like a very, very important part of the human experience. So I don't know. I mean, maybe GIRAH's a bad person. I don't know. I don't know him well enough. And like after, I met him in Portugal, and like we talked a lot about what happened and like trying to really understand like what drove him to do this thing and like who was he really, how much of him did I really know and how much did I not know. And then after that, like we sort of stopped talking. Like we communicated every once in a while, and then we sort of drifted away. And so I don't know him that well. Like honestly, knowing how much I didn't know. And knowing now how much time has passed in the interim, 5 years. So this guy's like, he was 18, 17 at the time, and now he's like 23, I guess, presumably 23. I have no idea what kind of 23-year-old he is. 5 years is a long fucking time.
Sounds like we got to find him and get him on the motherfucking podcast here, Haseeb. Sounds like we need to find GIRAH, man. I'll go to the Portuguese MMA gym, do a little training. I'll bring Olivier with me. Olivier Busquet out there, and Another question I got from Max Greenwood, friend of the podcast, potential future guest of the podcast. He said, "Did Haseeb ever pay Ashton $300,000? If so, how did he pay him?"
Yeah, I did. This is, I guess, another thing that people, for whatever reason, promulgated that I didn't pay Ashton. Yeah, I definitely did. I paid him.
Did Ashton say something that made people say something like that, or what?
So I think what happened is during the GIRAH scandal, so Ashton like got really pissed at both Jungle and I during the GIRAH scandal, and he like started saying some really crazy things that like Jungle was like, this is not correct. One of the things that I think that he said is that like I never paid him, which he later recanted. So he later said that like, no, that's not true. And like Ashton and I have talked several times in the last few years, and it's very, very clear that he doesn't think that. So yeah, so I mean that's, I don't know, it's such a like outlandish claim that like I never paid him back. Like if I never paid him back, like Ashton would still be like, he would have continued saying this for a while, but he never did. Like he didn't like, hey, you owe me money. How I paid him back, I don't remember. I mean, I remember initially there was like because I didn't have that much liquid, I paid him, I think like I paid him 30K up front and then like 90K at some point, and then like the rest of it happened at some point. I don't remember. But like Ashton was cool with it. Like we talked about it during the bet that like, you know, if to pay you out 300K, like, and the same thing with him, like he couldn't pay out 900K in cash. Like, you know, no one in the right mind has that kind of money laying around in a bank account. That he was like, yeah, it would take me some time to pay you. And I was like, yeah, same for me. Yeah. So yeah, but no, that's the way it is. And yeah, like, I don't, if Ashton still thinks I owe him money, I'm happy to chat with him about it, but he certainly never brought that up with me.
Uno Shark in the chat. We already talked about this, Uno Shark. I know some people are watching this live. If you watched on replay, you already talked about this. He said something about making the bet, trying to get 300K from each other in a pretty much a push yourself to death bet. Yeah, I mean, I point to this. The Brian Rask thing, he just did the thing where he drove from LA to Las Vegas and they bet 600K to 100K or some shit like that. I mean, it sounds like a very similar thing. And from from what I know from watching a couple running documentaries on Netflix, don't ask why I was watching these, people do this kind of shit. Like, this isn't like something that no one does. So I mean, it's not where you're pushing yourself to death. What do you run, 70 miles in 24 hours? Yeah. So from what I've read, that's not necessarily pushing yourself to death. So
yeah, the other thing is that like none of us fucking knew what we were doing. Like I mean, Ashton was an idiot, I was an idiot, Jungle was an idiot. Like this is like shit that we were doing when we were like 20 years old. So like we did not have any, like I didn't have any awareness at all that this was like some kind of weird this is like some kind of monumental horrible thing to put him through. It's like, oh, this guy thinks he can run a lot in 24 hours. All right, well, if you want to do it, I don't think you can. You know.
So is it fair to say you think you made a lot of mistakes with how you handle things in the past or how you looked at things, or
yeah,
not see it that way?
Absolutely.
And taking those experiences, do you think right now that do you think that you're still be able to really learn from them, or do you think you're going to make more mistakes now? Or
I mean, I'm sure I don't think anybody's going to. I would just trust anybody who says I'm not going to make any mistakes anymore.
Well, I think it's more like, certain people out there, just, you meet them, they don't really, like, they make some mistakes, sure, but they don't make like these massive, huge mistakes sort of thing like that, or get themselves in these type of situations. It just doesn't really happen.
Right.
And do you think that you're going to find yourself in some more crazy situations, I guess, here in the future, that when you look back in 5 years, you're going to be like, well, shit, maybe I shouldn't have done that sort of thing?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, now, I mean, it's weird, like getting a bunch of media attention for this whole Business Insider thing and like getting a job at Airbnb was really strange, because it's like getting this negative attention for a very ordinary thing, which is like just getting a job, and so to some degree, like I suspect, just because perhaps like the way that in which I live my life and the fact that I'm probably a very weird person is going to court a lot of controversy over my life, that I wouldn't be surprised to see happen. But the idea that like I'm going to, fumble my way into another GIRAH scandal or anything of that nature, I think like, I mean, if there's one thing the GIRAH scandal has taught me, it's like radical candor is the solution to most problems. It's like like if I really ask the question, like how could I have like not made any of these mistakes, right? I mean, like I didn't know who GIRAH was. I didn't think that it was anything wrong with like helping this guy, but I think it was like when something goes wrong, like openly coming out and saying like, hey, this thing went wrong, and like putting yourself on the line immediately, even without knowing that there is going to be repercussions regardless, right? That's a really, really fucking hard thing to do. And most people don't do that. Even people I think who claim they do mostly don't do that. There's a lot that as human beings, like, I mean, I think we're socialized to not raise flags when things aren't going to necessarily go wrong. But that is really the only way, I think, to ensure that those kinds of things don't happen, that you don't get entangled in deception.
Okay. Guys, a couple more questions from the chat. Let's see. What do you got? You just wrote something else on your site about getting a job in the tech industry, I believe, correct?
I did. Yeah. I just published it yesterday, actually. So yeah, as part of, again, like the original reason why I posted the blog post was to like give people, especially like in the effective altruism community and from the App Academy community, like some insight into what my job search was like, to help them with their job searches, right? That was the entire point. Because I don't have that big of an audience outside of those communities, and for the most part, like poker players don't pay attention to me anymore, which I'm for the most part thankful for, since they tend to be not very kind to me. But the entire thrust of it was like, yeah, I want to give advice and like help people break into the tech industry, because I think it's like it's tough and there's not a lot of great resources out there. So I just recently posted a post on basically how to break in to the tech industry and like try to get your first job. So it's all about like job searching, preparing for interviews, strategy during interviews, how to conduct yourself in order to maximize your performance, stuff like that. And then I'm gonna be following up with another post that's just like all about negotiation.
I guess is part of this also, I mean, you trying to maybe build yourself up, build a brand, or go that direction with things too. I mean, it seems like, why wouldn't you want to do that, I suppose?
I think, yeah, to some degree, but I think like the it's not so much a brand as just kind of being kind of having a voice within technology, right? It's like I've had a voice within poker for a long time, and that's really cool. But like that's not the world that I'm in anymore. That's not the sea that I swim in, right? And so I think, yeah, like if eventually I want to found a company or I want to like get out there and have more impact in the tech world, then I think it's useful to like have your voice out there in the marketplace, so I mean, build a brand is kind of weird because like there isn't really anything I want to sell or like any particular way I want to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe someday if I start.
Right. It's like a future thing. It's sort of putting yourself in a position to where in the future, if you decide you want to go down that route, well, now you can go down that right because you established these steps in the past.
Sure. Although, like, honestly, I think if I were to build a business, I don't think I'd want it to be about me. I think I'd much rather be about like a tech product or like something more.
Well, so in that situation, if it's about a product, you're still, don't you think, do you think that you being also a voice or a face then sort of ties in with the potential success of that product as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it certainly by necessity it does, right? Like, because if you're a founder of a company, like there's no way in which it's not tied to you in some way. But like as much as possible, like I guess I just like I've had enough of that as a poker player, and like it just sucks. Like it's not. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you maybe have a comparable experience.
No, I 100% agree with you. Actually, when I think about entrepreneurship myself, and I wish that I could do. I mean, I don't know. Being a poker player, you're basically it's all about you. Like you're very involved in it, and I sort of wish that. I don't know, maybe not wish, but I think I would like to do something where it wasn't just me. It was just like the thing. It wasn't associated with me necessarily. I think that'd be kind of fun and a different way to go upon it, and a different challenge too. So
yeah, totally. I'm definitely in agreement with you there.
Yeah. Guys in the chat, I guess that's it. All right. Anyway, so people want to find you if you're gonna be putting stuff on Twitter, you tweet, you get the website, right?
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Haseeb, HOSSEEB, or just get me on my blog. If you just Google my name, you'll find my blog.
Cool. Do you answer? Oh, this guy in the chat's crazy. All ears 99, kid. I might have to give you a temp. Fucking, you're crazy, buddy. You must be on some turned up in the chat today, man. But yeah, so if people ask you questions, they got some questions. I mean, some people might want to ask about something. Is the best place on Twitter, email, or something like that, or if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, any of those media are fine. I would only ask that, like, if you, well, I don't know, like, actually no, yeah, whatever. Send me whatever you want.
Cool.
Fuck it. Yeah.
All right, buddy. Haseeb, thanks for coming on the pod. It was very, I think it was interesting,
Yeah.
and I definitely think that you gave me personally, a lot of things I can think about in terms of the way I view poker and the way I view poker play. I mean, you said a lot of really interesting things about just in terms of happiness and poker and a lot of different things related. Like I'm pretty anxious to go back and actually listen to that myself. And, you know, I appreciate you coming out and talking more about the, you know, rehashing these old things that you probably don't necessarily want to discuss, but
yeah,
you know, I thank you for coming on, man.
Of course, absolutely. I do hope this ends up being my last poker interview in the sense that, like, it would be nice if, like, at least in some sense, like, I can just be, like, done with this part of my life and be like, all right, cool, I'm doing this totally separate thing now, you know. And that was actually, like, in some part of the motivation why I was like, all right, cool, you know, I'll do this interview even though I really, you know, like, I don't enjoy rehashing a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, like, yeah, you know what, let's give one for the road.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you much. And in about 4 or 5 years, when I'm doing a podcast that isn't called Poker Life and it's called something else Life, we'll get you back on the podcast and we'll see what the hell, we'll see what you've done in the next 4 or 5 years, man. It should be should be exciting times.
Looking forward to it.
All right, guys in the chat, I'm out. Peace out. Much love. Be back tomorrow morning with Jungle Man, 11 a.m. Eastern. Jungle Man, entertaining as always. I'll see you later. See you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care. Peace.